That's on the
Okay, folks, should we're at the appointed there. Got the next three and a bit hours for a
not all for this.
you get the next 3 hours and a quarter of an hour for everything else. Smorgasbord of different things this afternoon. Just apologies to record from Councillor White, who's emailed us and Councillor Tedder, who's stuck somewhere. But yeah, first item, over to you.
Excellent. So this is the next iteration of our discussion about the Statement of Expectations for the Water Services CCO. You'll see in the materials that we sent out a more fulsome Statement of Expectations than the one that you didn't get much time to absorb last time, and incorporated into that is the feedback, or rather than feedback, the input that you provided last time. I have also included a bit of a summary of the points from last time, courtesy of Copilot, the beauty of the transcript. That highlights the key things that you raised, as well as hopefully whether the ones that I covered off in the Statement of Expectations. There's one item that hasn't been covered off that is worth a discussion because it was raised last time. We haven't covered it off, so we need to talk about why we haven't. And what has also happened since last time is that key teams within QLDC have reviewed the Statement of Expectations, particularly my teams. In terms of the water strategy team, so Helen has reviewed it as well, in terms of making sure that we have a linkage between those key strategic direction things that will remain with QLDC and how they will flow through into the Water Services CCO. So they cover the areas of land use planning. Sorry, Dave Wallace has also had input. Yeah, land use planning, spatial planning, climate and biodiversity plan, and related strategies in that kind of sphere. And what else has been added since then? That is all. So Julian and Maz have also reviewed it, and there is
probably a couple of small areas.
Yeah, there's a couple of areas that Maz wanted to raise, and one matter from the Constitution that we wanted to raise. So if we start with the Statement of Expectations, maybe if we just start with the area that we didn't cover in the updated version, we just find that part. So Catherine can chip in here if I get this wrong. So this, Catherine's online? Yes, she is. So the point that was raised last time was about whether we should or could direct the CCO to have a debt limit, essentially, through the Statement of Expectations. Now, we've had a range of discussions about this between the CCO establishment team and us, and Catherine and the LGFA, to determine kind of what, and we've inferred somewhat, I think, from the discussion last time about what the actual issue was that you were worried about. And the view that we have is that there are kind of two key reasons why we wouldn't want to put a debt limit on the CCO. So one is related to financial independence and the risk of essentially overreaching with our role and calling into question that financial independence, which then affects the ability for the debt to stand alone from our debt. So that's the first point. The second point is actually if what we are concerned about are matters of financial prudence, good financial management, affordability for the community, then actually the economic regulatory regime is designed to manage those things, but also so is the framework that they will have in place with the LGFA and what the LGFA requires from a covenant perspective. We would expect them to have a robust treasury policy, which is how they manage that for themselves. And if those are the things we were concerned about, then it would probably be more appropriate for us to identify through the statement of expectations, performance monitoring things we might want them to report to us on, although many of those are probably already covered through the economic regulation. So, Catherine, did you want to add anything about the conversation you had with LGFA? Or is that just having
happy to do that for the chair. So it was around the credit rating, because we had our credit rating conversation for council last week, and the credit rater was concerned about the water entity and its debt, and I said, look, have a talk to the LGFA. So I've arranged that conversation. What the LGFA would prefer is that they have an agreement with the Water Services CCO, and then instead of taking a guarantee from council, which they would have to anyway, but on paper, they would rather take security over the revenue. And that's what they structured an agreement with Selwyn, CCO, and that's how they plan to approach our Water Services CCO. So we would effectively never be called on for our guarantee in the balance sheet.
And so I think that was the other related part of this question actually, was about the guarantee and whether, because we're guaranteeing it, will we financially independent and would the debt be incorporated into, should we be recognising that differently? And I think we had circulated previously the advice we gave earlier through the decision-making process on that, which was that the guarantee, regardless of whether it's underpinned by this agreement with the CCO, to have the guarantee on the revenue, it would be a note to our financial statements. It wouldn't be recorded as a liability, and that's because of the fact that if it ever needed to be called on, the revenue of the CCO could be adjusted to ensure it can cover the debt. And that's the same as how we treat the Queenstown Airport Corporation. And that's the same as how this kind of CCO is dealt with across New Zealand.
Can I practically do that with ComCom and the affordability? We don't know what that's going to look like, but it's not, again, like we no longer have this sort of end supply revenue. We've got a cap, but ComCom is not a hard cap.
The ComCom's regulation is affordability is only one arm of it. Ensuring you collect enough revenue to pay for your costs is the other arm of it. So water CCOs have to do both. So actually under the regulatory environment, it'd be even less unlikely that a CCO could get into the kind of difficulties we're talking about because of the economic regulation regime.
Yeah, and I'm thinking long into the future, at the moment. But is there something that we could put in there instead? Yeah, we don't put cap on, but if you're going to go over a certain level of debt, it could just be reported to us that this is coming. It should come anyway with the financial reporting, but
I think the financial reporting you've asked for includes debt.
If that financial reporting was out of sync, because sometimes things are, there could just be a trigger in the Constitution to say if the debt was, I don't know, maybe it's not necessary. It's just something that
I think
we'll let you know.
I think you'll see that evidence through the recurring reporting.
It should,
which is every 6 months.
Yeah.
It won't change faster.
No. Again, I'm thinking of a safety clause for the future for councils that are not so involved in them.
I think the general principle that is in the statement of expectations around no surprises, if something massive was going to happen out of nowhere, that would warrant a significant increase in a very short space of time of debt, which I'm not sure that such a situation would arise in the context of this, unless it was a response to some kind of severe weather event or emergency. But the no surprises principle in here would have the CCO inform us anyway. Yeah.
But I agree with that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well informed, and remembering that you still have levers, right? You can change the Constitution, you can change the statement of expectation, you can change the board, as well as all the various other commentary. That's something. I think as we heard from our earlier workshop, the lead time on the spend on your country is pretty significant. So it's not like somebody's just going to go and drop 100 million overnight or something.
I'm not sure when the best time to ask this question is, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So how does all of this look, and it applies to the constitution as well and shareholding things in an amalgamated world? So let's say we're a Otago unitary council. So where do all of these SOEs and constitutions that talk to QLDC, does that all just get rewritten or?
So I imagine there'll be a transition, if we were to end up in that situation, there'll be quite a long transition period where that kind of thing would need to be sorted out. What would happen under a scenario with an Otago Unitary Council is that the Otago Unitary Council would become the shareholder of the water entity, and the statement of expectations for the water entity is updated every 3 years. I imagine on initial establishment of a unitary authority for Otago, if that's what it's landed on, the existing one would just continue to the end of that 3-year period. And then for the next one, it would be the unitary authority that sets the statement of expectations, but they would also be setting the statement of expectations for the other water entities in Otago.
And I think the important point there is that if that was set up, they would become the shareholder.
Yeah.
So they get all rights.
Yeah.
Just CCO would transfer as an EC.
Yes.
Question for Catherine. Catherine, we actually two questions. The rating agency they refer to as Fitch, not Duff and Phelps, S&P or Moody's.
Yeah, Fitch.
Only Fitch. All right. And second thing is, you said that they would want to take security over the rating. What does that mean?
So, the guarantee at the moment that we have in the balance sheet for LGFA would be no different to what we'd have for the water services CCO. We'd have a note in our financial statement saying that we are jointly liable, along with other councils for the LGFA debt. We'd have 2 different notes. So saying the same thing, but one would be for our water entity and one would be for the LGFA.
Right. So as the guarantor of the CCO's debt, there would be a line item in our financials.
Which is 0 value.
Yeah. And I assume that there's already a line item right now as the guarantor of QAC, correct?
No,
The LGFA.
LGFA.
Okay, got it. All right. So this is no different than the airport in terms of
No, the airport is completely separate.
guarantor status.
It's the same as the LGFA.
We're giving the guarantee effective of the CCO, but effectively it's not affecting our credit rating as a council to borrow
Correct.
now. But we still are giving the guarantee.
Yes, and they will call on the revenue.
They'll take a security up for the revenue
Yes.
stream. It's one level of security, but they still have our guarantee. So if the security over the revenue stream isn't enough, then technically we still have to pay as guarantor.
Right.
The revenue is only the water rating component.
Or the payment of effective of that.
It's only the, as
So
in,
all of the revenue of the water services CCO.
yeah, the water rating component. Yeah, as in, yeah.
The LGFA.
What we do both, because we're an owner of the LG. This is exactly the same as the LGFA. So if the LGFA defaulted, we are liable for the debt held by the LGFA because we are an owner, part owner of the LGFA. We don't fully own it, so we're not fully responsible, but it's the same situation as for that.
But the fact
And that
that
there's no value attached to it because of under accounting rules, etc. The likelihood of the guarantee being called on because of the guaranteed revenue stream is unlikely.
I think we're not an equity owner of the LGFA. We're one of the few councils that's not. All the owners of the LGFA are North Island except for Waimakariri.
We guarantee their debt though, Catherine, correct?
Fine,
Yeah,
guarantees that.
They're all jointly severable. Yeah.
The owner.
in terms of us as a council being able to, and this shifts across us as a council being able to borrow any our debt limits,
No,
our guarantee of the CCO is not affected, does not affect
It's not-
that
no.
ability.
no, they're considered separately by LGFA.
Yeah.
And using totally different mechanisms. So we have a debt to revenue ratio. The CCO will have a free funds for operations to debt.
And could you confirm that Fitch is happy with that? Or you still to have that meeting, Catherine?
So LGFA were bringing Finch just to clarify that they'd already done that with Standard and Poor's, and already got that over the line with Standard and Poor's. So it's just that additional rating agency. They just need to have the conversation.
One process with it. All right.
So do we have?
So we're happy with that?
Yeah, in terms of
Excellent.
not looking for,
Perfect. Okay, so then if we turn our minds to the rest of the statement of expectations, I don't know if you wanted to go through your feedback, if you wanted me to, at a really high level, talk through what the different sections cover. I mean, there's a lot of content in here, obviously, so we don't want to walk through it all, but hopefully you've all had a chance to read and absorb.
They get some of it small and some of it big. Some of it's just little words that make a difference.
Okay.
So some of those I could probably just see through if this is coming back again and we could weigh it up and see whether
That'd be good.
depends on how we feel about it.
If you've got little things like that, maybe just send them through. If you've got any material, things, maybe those are probably worth discussing with the group.
Do you want us to go?
And while Maz and Julian are here.
You want to start?
I'll do one.
Okay, we'll see.
So my first big one, the disputes. So at 0.5.
So we're talking about the constitutional statement of expectations.
Statement of expectations.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So both parties will aim to resolve differences of a view early and at the lowest appropriate level. And that was the bit that got me, because it seems that there are different levels of dispute. Some will involve governance matters and some will involve operational matters. I was just concerned that where there was maybe a dispute around one of the strategic documents or something that's I wouldn't want it to be resolved at the lowest level, officer to officer, across the parties. So I was wondering if we could adjust that so that we something like both parties will aim to resolve differences of the earliest and at the hang on, sorry.
Which page are you on?
Solution operation.
Clause 5.
0.5, so it's under relationship expectations on page 19, I think it's looking.
So the intent of this clause is to essentially underpin the collaborative relationship between the CCO and council, whereby every little thing where there is everything where there is a slight disagreement doesn't become a dispute that has to be resolved. The point of this clause is to say, work together, and only if things really can't be worked out do you escalate them.
So I think I just wouldn't want to mix up operational and governance matters in that. I think you need to make a distinction. The solution might be operational matters should be resolved at the lowest appropriate level. Matters relating to the interpretation of statement of expectation, water services strategy, strategic priorities, significant departures from council expectations, those kinds of things should be escalated properly to the governance level. Because we don't want the interpretation of strategy to be resolved by staff if it has a significant impact on strategic direction. So,
well, I think, like, if you think about the conversation this morning, the presentation you had from Helen, there are lots of things within that strategy that you wouldn't expect to come to governance to resolve. They're a matter of interpretation, they're a matter of agreement, they're not necessarily things that you would expect non-technical people to have a view on or to be able to make a decision on. And so they are things that the appropriate officers on each side should be working through to resolve. So I'm not sure it's as simple as just saying if it's operational or if it's strategic.
Well, I just don't think it's as simple as saying resolve everything at the lowest possible level. I think there's some nuance in there that's required, and I don't know what it is.
So I just wonder whether it's actually remove the word lowest,
yes.
because resolve it at the applicable.
Appropriate.
Yeah.
We don't have the lowest level of governance. Or where is it?
In paragraph 4 it does go on the higher level.
Yeah.
And say
Yes.
three waters will engage early on matters of strategic, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So that, in my mind, that overarches before 4, and I think taking out the word lowest is the way to go.
Okay.
I mean, the word appropriate there to me does mean it should be, could be low, could be high, could be appropriate. taking out lower.
Solves that for me. Does someone else want to have a crack at something?
Got any particular points that they've,
Did we resolve that query about the chief executive veto?
Yes, well, we had something.
Well, we resolved the fact that it's. So we had previously given advice that it's the director's responsibility to appoint a chief executive, and it's the council's responsibility to appoint the directors.
Yeah, I understand that. But we didn't
And
resolve,
so,
we didn't resolve whether it was helpful to have a, so, I mean, and for Julian's benefit, so I question, so we're often told that the appointment of the chief executive is the most important job that we do as council now. That obviously has some carryover to the water services, who the chief executive of the water services CCO is of critical importance to council, notwithstanding that we're appointing a board and obviously and yourselves to administer those things for us. But it is a critical risk to council if we end up with the wrong chief executive. Now, the question I asked previously is it tenable, or is it appropriate, or is there another way to deal with it that we council have some sort of veto or like final say in the appointment of the chief executive for the water services subsidiary?
so we advised it wasn't appropriate for a veto,
advised-
but we've added a clause in here. Have you seen the clause? And that is one of the items that Julian and Maz, I think, wanted to talk about.
Okay, so
The clause in here provides, so, but Julian can respond on that.
Yeah, I mean, my comment is it would be highly unusual, and I think, you know, for a range of reasons, it's very important that we understand the role of council and the role of the board, and you have to be very careful not to step in.
I understand.
It's very challenging. So I would hope that the relationship we're going to have is you would hear before we made the appointment of first of all, what is the job we're describing? Does that, you know, does it fit? And second, through the process, that you would have a level of understanding. We might share a short list and have a conversation. Generally, I would think between myself and the mayor, just to see if there are any sensitivities that we in ourselves might not know of. And that would be the relationship. But really, your job is to hold me to account, and my job is to hold the chief executive to account. And muddying that water is quite risky.
I get that. I'm just trying to, and I agree with you that that's how the relationship should work. I would point out that I don't think there's been a phone call from the chair of the QAC to the mayor to say this is who we plan to appoint a chief executive of the QAC. Now, I don't disagree with you. That's how it should work. I want it to be explicit, and that's how it should work, because I don't think that is how it works, and I want it to be explicit. Now,
It's not about the current individuals.
it's not about the
It's like if we get Attila behind in your role, and there's this.
So when you fire him, sorry,
Yeah.
but this is really important on an accountability basis. You know, if you're going to hold me to account, then I have to have the ability to appoint the people that I'm going to hold to account. So you've got, I think, really clear about what are we trying to achieve here, and who's responsible.
Well, as I said, I think what I'm trying to achieve is being explicit about that relationship, because I think the no surprises policy, the fact that you will come to speak to the mayor about, you know, before you appoint a chief executive, that the fact those things I want, and you know, this is absolutely no. I'd be very impressed with you, Julian, but I want it to be explicit, because I don't want the risk for us of, you know, and you might not know that there's the previous relationship.
Sure. No, I get that point, absolutely. The things that we don't know.
Yeah, the things we don't know, and I want to remove that risk, and I'm just trying to find a way to do it.
So are you happy with the words that we've added, which is provide opportunities for the council to have input in the recruitment process for the chief executive? 23E on page 11. So that leaves it to Julian to work with the mayor to decide what those opportunities look like, which could be as simple as giving him a call to say, these are the people we're thinking about, any red flags, or whatever you so it doesn't define what that process is, but it embeds in the statement of expectations that between the mayor and the chair, they'll agree.
Sorry, could you just point me to that clause?
Page 11, 23E.
So inserting a kill clause in the House QLDC, something you think would be a very bad idea.
That would interfere with the director's responsibilities, whereas this is a relationship approach.
And so just taking that one step further, speaking to that relationship, the expectations in that relationship between the board and the council, where have we made that explicit around?
In the relationship expectations section, which is 3, 4, and 5. So the relationship between them based on good faith, mutual respect, openness, transparency, no surprises approach. Each organisation has distinct roles and responsibilities. Both will work collaboratively and constructively to support effective decision making and the delivery of high quality water services.
Is there an opportunity in this section to include a notation about sensitive decisions or things like that?
So in the working with council, it then breaks it down into various things, one of which talks about how you're going to meet together. It talks about the types, providing prompt notification of material or significant events, transactions, compliance issues, emerging risks, significant service failures. So that's in the following section that breaks it down.
Is there an opportunity under section 7 to include appointment of the chief executive, for instance, as being something that's
We've got it in section 23, but we could move it into.
Well, I think it's useful being in both.
I wonder.
There's one's relationship, one's something else.
I just wonder, thinking about this, whether we've captured it clearly enough about, the roles in terms of what the CCO is going to be doing is a very significant part of the council's providing to the community, right? And so have we defined that well enough so that by doing that, anything might become a sensitive issue that either party could become aware of? Have we, have we described in here that we're both part of serving the community, that we are both on the same page, or ought to be on the same page? And then it might not be just the chief executive, so we can easily say we will recognise both who you appoint to the chair is important, who we appoint to the chief executive is important in relation to this being successful for your community.
Because just going to that relationship, I've been involved in the appointment of directors and chairs, and we have, as a council, we've gone to the QAC and said, just to finally vet them, I suppose. And in one case, it actually resulted in a change. So, I suppose the signal that that's the expectation, that's how we practice it, that's what we do in practice. But, I
think that's at a director level. I think the start is different. I think the key thing around this table would be that political sensitivity. So, because there'll be some things that the organisation will be doing that are absolutely politically sensitive in terms of water metering and things like that, or maybe there's other things that come along that are politically sensitive. So that's probably that political sensitivity maybe isn't caught in paragraph 7.
There's a slight extension on what you've got there to be a little bit more explicit around communicate.
Yeah, I think it's getting there. And as I said, I think that it's helpful. There's two parts. I think it's helpful it's further down, but I think it's also helpful it's in that relationship piece in point 7, that it's just explicit around our expectation or what's important. And that's one of the important things that we're tasking you guys to do, that has an impact on us.
I actually think it works better in the relationship list than here, because it's not an effective, it's not an outcome per se. It's a specific thing related to us
an
working
expectation
together.
about how we work together.
Yeah.
Yes, and
If nothing else, it's useful, hearing this it's a really important thing to us, and I want it to be reflected in it.
So I think I certainly knew it was important because it's been discussed every time in these sessions, which is why we added this clause. So I think if we just bring it up front and make it a bit clearer that it's part of those core working together responsibilities.
Can I just test that we do have the expectation right, that it is around communicating where the board are at with that process at the appropriate level?
It is, but I would hope that if we had serious concerns about a candidate, that the board would hear that. Now, I mean, I take your point that we can always sack the board, but I mean, that's an extreme measure for us to take, and it's not one that we would take lightly.
And I think the important point about that is that it's about things we might not know.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not about stepping in. So we just need to get this balance so that we operate in a way that we're thinking this, any topic that we think might have, but we're having a dialogue such that you might be going, hey, wait a minute, that's going to be very sensitive over there.
This is just something that struck mind completely random, but this is a statement of expectations for how we expect the organisation to work and interrelate. Other things from the from the board's perspective about how we work and communicate, because some of that's implied, but just in the same way that we wouldn't expect you to put out a media release saying we had to double the water race because that bunch of councillors were just slack and didn't do anything. You might not expect us to publicly share our views on the performance of the organisation. So I don't know where that fits into.
Yeah, I think that's covered in terms of it being.
It's just because if not rules of engagement is the wrong word, because that implies a battle, but
sharing insights.
Yeah, I do think that at some point, whether we call it a chart or whatever, but a sit down and write a few things about how we will operate is just worth having that discussion, and let's work through some examples so that, and then we can build that into something. But
I think the wording here as well, provide opportunities to have input in, was left broad enough that if you wanted to have more, if the board and the chair and the mayor wanted a different process that wasn't just having a phone call, you could also accommodate that. Last time there was a discussion about there could be a council or representative on a recruitment panel, for example. And so we've just left it open that you can agree that later. There should be some opportunity.
Which I think by that second one, so that second vote, not just in point 7.
Yeah.
The original one.
so I think that is important if we keep focusing on who's accountable for what, but also where the knowledge sits and what is important, so that we get that balance right.
Something you just said then about how we might work together also just relates to number 7 as well. G, it's about the cons between emerging risk and failures. And you've got the fact that you need to obviously notify the public. You also need to notify us. And I just wonder, how do you realistically see that time frame working?
Sorry, which clause are we?
7G.
What you're saying is ideally we know before public does.
Yeah, but then also if you need to then notify us for us not to be like, you haven't told us, but then you need to notify the public quickly. It's like we're adding quite a lot of layers, right? I know that. So I just wonder how.
That's actually a good point, though. It's important for you to recognise that the board will be coming to you with things that the public needs to be notified about, that they haven't yet notified the public about, because part of their prudent process is to make sure you as the shareholder are across it before the public is.
Yeah,
and so, yeah, but that's just a thing that will have to be managed.
Yes, and there'll be different levels to that. Like
Yeah.
there'll be the governance stuff, and then there will be the day-to-day action management and operational stuff of boost pipe or, an incident.
But ironically, a recent example where they failed to do that was when they appointed a new chief executive. At the QAC, sorry.
Oh.
So that we found out in the paper rather than being notified beforehand, and that's no surprises policy. That has to we have to avoid that situation. So, yeah.
And there will be circumstances I can imagine where we have no choice but to get a notification out. And our obligation should be to make sure you get it at least at the same time. If we don't have sufficient time.
Public health risk or something,
I think it is also just worth remembering that you will have a different relationship with this water CCO than we have with the airport. So not just because this function was part of us and it's separating out, so we have a different kind of tie to it, but also just the way that the relationship is established under the legislation and the economic regulation regime. We still have an obligation associated with the delivery of water services as their owner that is different to what we have for the airport.
I was just wondering in 1B, right at the top, when it's saying the development of stable and predictable pricing paths when setting water charges. I just wonder how a good example, recently, the Luggett and Howe spikes, how do we have in there, I know that it is kind of saying predictable and stable, but how do we explicitly say long, well, it does say affordable, but I mean, like long-term or early identification of future investment. How do we mitigate what happened with us?
Well, as you know, it's going into the water services strategy and our LTP, we're doing work around that whole model that feeds the growth versus the levels of service and how we build up the cost allocation for projects. Yeah. But in those two instances, there were significant investments that were signalled in advance in those two communities that were going to result in higher than previous costs on those communities. One of the things that will need to be worked through in terms of the pricing paths, and this is why we've added and equity, is about whether the cost of infrastructure should be harmonised at a ward level or a district level, or whether it should fall on individual communities. And in particular, small communities. So that is a question for the pricing model, and that will be in the water services strategy and will inform ongoing what those are. But that is part of the intent of this.
Until we've done some investigation into what the models would look like, presumably. Yeah.
And there'll be decisions to make by the board around what that model looks like in terms of harmonisation versus cost falling on communities. There's processes to go through before those prices are set.
And when would we find out about that? Like we would know.
In the course of the first water services strategy, you'll see it more than you would have previously because, you're still the owner. You'll see some of that alongside the LTP discussions. Ongoing, it would be something that is a bit different. So that is not something necessarily that you will have. You should have some well, that's probably you'll have some visibility of it, but not in the way you do for the LTP.
Just in terms of you don't get to choose what projects are our priority or anything.
Or what the pricing models are.
Yes, but the strategy will provide visibility on all of that, including things like if harmonisation was being considered or modelled. So you'd see that throughout the cycle of the water services strategy, which is very similar to the LTP.
But we're the workshops we're doing for the LTP, which if we were the owners of water would include water, you won't have that level of, you won't have input into that. But it'll be transparent.
There's some words in brackets in clause 12. Hamilton clause.
Oh, yeah.
What's that all about?
Well, I mean, the Hamilton clause is a bit harder line than what we've proposed because it's from the Hamilton statement of expectation. We had some internal discussions about whether we should go that hard and we didn't land there. So I probably should have taken that out. But
we didn't land there.
Do you have a view?
No. I was just trying to understand what I was really trying to get at. So
we have
basically making sure that either party enters into development agreements in isolation from the other.
Yes.
Which does make sense to me.
Yes.
So I would think that's words. Yeah. That what we're saying. That where you got to as well.
Yeah, so essentially what we're saying is that us and the Water Services CCO should work together when we're working with developers, particularly this plays out in growth areas. So where we're entering into developer agreements, that we're not doing it in isolation of each other, and mostly that's not to ensure that we're not building transport infrastructure or zoning for increased density, for example, where you're not putting in water infrastructure and are never going to enable it, and vice versa, that you're not putting in water infrastructure in areas that are not high priority for us from a development perspective, and we're not putting in appropriate infrastructure to support it.
So you're suggesting.
You're saying it should,
That's not-
you're saying it should be in there.
Oh, no, it is in there. So the following words are just a different way of saying it.
Well, the Hamilton bit, that first bit there.
Yeah.
That you're not suggesting that's a no.
So if you take out the square brackets
Yeah, so start at QLDC 3.
and start at QLDC 3 waters, we've framed it in a more collaborative way. But I guess it was to show that, so we have looked at the other growth councils' statement of expectations, and Hamilton's is quite strict, rigid. Their development is different to ours. It's not as fast changing as ours. Like if you look at the 12 fast tracks so far that we're dealing with, we're going to have quite a evolving growth space for some time. And so that integration of the strategic planning functions and the land use planning functions across QLDC and the water services entity are going to be really important. It's going to be really important.
And the other difference is Hamilton has 2 shareholders.
Yeah.
So that there are reasons why there are different.
When you're suggesting that when you enter a development agreement, it would be with the 3 parties in the one agreement? Is that what you're suggesting, or is it
Not necessarily. You could still have, I think you probably still have to have, well, you may have to have separate ones, where you could have one with multiple parties. The point is that we're working together so that we are planning to for land use and infrastructure in the same places on the same time frames. Yeah. Yeah, and with this, and with integrated funding mechanisms, because usually developer agreements come into play where we're wanting to have developers fund things. So we might want to discuss, water and transport or social infrastructure as a whole, not just have discussions about funding one or the other. And it's more than just the developer agreements. The developer agreements is the tool, but it's really it's the planning.
Julian, have you come up with a better name yet?
And the tool, yeah.
Sorry, you come up with a better name yet?
No, I haven't asked that question. Got to work on that.
I learned them one in there, are there water bylaws?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Could I raise one?
Yeah.
Thanks, Mayor. And it is around the water services strategy and this conversation that we didn't quite bottom out last time. So we've got it features in the Constitution, and we also have it in the statement of expectations, and that is this point of requiring the water services CCO to make amendments to the water services strategy.
Whereabouts are we in the SOE?
So
Statement of expectations.
statement of expectations is
19, clause 19 on page 10.
One page.
You need an extra page.
Page 9 now.
actually.
Oh, sorry, we've got the track changes version, so we can see each other's comments on them.
Clause 19.
Paragraph 19. Sorry, I'll stop using page numbers. That's not helpful. So it's the wording, which is essentially that we can request or require amendments to the water services strategy, which is also in the Constitution.
Yeah. So if you recall that sort of that conversation that we had about approving, I think if we leave this in, it could be problematic for the CCO, and it could also be problematic in terms of, well, who is officially approving the water services strategy, and therefore who's holding those obligations, which is obviously the board of directors. I think Julie and I would be quite interested in removing that or discussing.
Word or require.
Yes.
So it was definitely a mixed bag around this table
Yes.
when it was discussed.
Yeah.
And I think we landed on or require, but we've had some internal debates between the two teams about the risks that would expose. And so Maz and Julian were keen to bring it back to the table for discussion.
We've also looked at what others are doing
Yeah.
as well and had conversation with LGFA. We're all sort of points to it's probably best for everyone to remove that if there is comfort.
It's an interesting one because it has to, we set the statement of expectations and the water services strategy has to give effect to it.
Yes.
I think. So where a water strategy, services strategy is produced that we don't believe aligns with the statement of expectations, this is huge. In those circumstances, we should be able to require amendments. Now there may be a dispute around what the interpretation of the statement of expectations is, but I guess what I'm getting at is I don't think removing it, reduces our obligations. At the end of the day, we are setting the direction via the statement of expectations. It should be met by the water services strategy. If we have a board that was stepping outside and sort of saying, well, no, we don't want to meet statement of expectations, the easiest way to resolve it is if we can require an amendment rather than going through a.
But what we could have is a dispute mechanism so that if you request an amendment that is because of lack of alignment with the water services strategy, we then have a process, but also they would then not be compliant with the economic regulation or the legislation, which means the regulator would also come down on
Bear
it.
in mind that we're catering for when things go wrong. This stuff is, so it's good to have some safeguards in there. They just might need to be a bit more nuanced.
Yeah, I think there is the risk of stepping in and being seen to step in, being director, whatever you want to call it, and liability associated with that. Being able to request an amendment, if you don't get the amendment, then there's a process outlined in here to go through, right? And it'll be going through that process. You will explore whether it does or doesn't meet statement of expectations, and I would have thought through that process you would come to an agreement.
And that goes to another thing is that informal process. And maybe that's the next thing we might be able to discuss is that it doesn't set out an informal process. It just says that will be an informal process. And I just wonder if that needs to be a little more, the informal process needs to be a little more descriptive of the steps that.
Bit more formalised.
Well, I think if that would make you more comfortable with removing or require, then we can certainly, I think that would be preferable to having that link with the requirement.
Yes.
Yeah.
Although less prescriptive is better because then it remains informal.
It doesn't.
I'm sure we'll provide something.
It would be good to have some steps and make sure that
It's probably more than just an email to each other.
yes, people have me chat and sort of.
Yeah.
Well, I think it depends. If the informal doesn't work, what do you go to? When you say there is a level of formal dispute that could be called upon, if needed, but the idea would be it never be needed. We're both supposed to be both on the same page.
Yeah.
And so that is hence the section in the briefing paper. We had an internal discussion. Mike had put in a disputes clause, and then we'd gone, oh, that seems a bit heavy-handed when we can require an amendment anyway. But I think if we're going to take out require amendment and leave it at request, we can look at something that's a bit more formal than just saying we would have an informal process.
Yeah.
Or we could have the option to go.
Or the option to go
Should
formal, where you'd step through it.
Well,
You'd start.
And I don't think you need to detail what that is because they're well understood.
Yeah.
Either party
I think that's
can
the
determine a formal process.
Julian, this morning I was reminded by one of my colleagues of a rabbit hole I went down early in the piece around what constitutes water services. And so the Local Government Water Services Act is quite narrow in its definitions around what water services are, to the point that if you to take it literally and that it possibly only includes drinking water and domestic uses of water internally in a house and doesn't include irrigation outside of watering your garden and stuff like that. Now, I'm just interested in your view. Is there a risk there that the narrowness of that definition would, I suppose, limit the water services CCO to only addressing domestic supply issues and not dealing to irrigation supply issues and demands in our region?
And we're talking about just irrigation that's taken from a domestic
supply. So, directly, one of our biggest, and we had a good presentation this morning, that a huge amount of our water is for people watering their gardens outside. That isn't strictly within the definition of drinking water and water services, but is clearly a massive amount of the demand and supply that we provide.
Yeah, so I guess, again, it's early days for me, but my perspective would be any water we supply, we would want to be looking after managing whatever the appropriate word is.
Well, I suppose it's a takeaway, and I appreciate it is early days, but I encourage you to go back and look from the top down in the definitions, water services, water, drinking water, right down to the wording that comes through. I mean, strictly speaking, it could be argued that you're not mandated to supply irrigation.
Presumably that's your concern, Quinton. Your concern is that the water services entity could decide at some point that they are not going to supply enough for all of that domestic irrigation that's blowing out demand.
If that occurred, we'd fall short of community expectations significantly.
Right.
Now, if you're in a financial situation where you have to prioritise things because you cannot supply it to the full extent, but you're only mandated to supply drinking water, then that might be a decision that you're forced to make. So I mean, I just want to know what the implications of it are. I don't like you saying.
To give it a different spin, if there's a demand for grey water, well, that's going to come from potable water. So who's going to manage that? And so in the future, 10 years down the road, we say to the CCO, please take potable water, turn it into grey water and send it back. And they say, that's not our problem. It's not in the act.
I think it's a technical issue with the definition, sure, but it might be that they put that in there so that some schemes that are set up, maybe some unique subdivisions where they do all of their other water themselves, but the drinking water needs to be supplied. So I think it might cater for that. But if you're on a reticulated network, it's not like the water supplier can decide that this town only needs so much because that's what we calculate, because it would go down the pipe and someone would use it for a wrong use and then they would not be meeting the needs of another user. So
Correct.
I think it's
I've actually seen that happen. It happened in South Australia, right, where they said you can't have any water for irrigation. And the council did that, not a CCO. And that, to me, is one of the advantages of having water services CCO. And my belief is that that was driven by the fact that the council made other decisions and spent the money on things other than water services. That won't be our focus. So where there's a water use, we will have direct interest in providing it. And sure, if we end up having to prioritise things, maybe decisions happen, but you will know about that. Right? It will be in the plans and the strategy.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll never get to that point, but I am concerned that, strictly speaking, this is a CCO, Water Services CCO formed under the Water Services Act. You might not even have a legal mandate to provide irrigation water.
Look, the economic regulation,
everything falls out.
the economic regulation will address this anyway, because the water usage, if you look at our water usage and all the analysis, and you saw it this morning, right? You can clearly see where we've got huge spikes in demand that are caused by irrigation. So the economic regulator is going to be looking at our water supply, the investments we have to make, the prices we set, and whether we have demand management in place to manage that. Because if our cost of building infrastructure is huge because of this use, and we are not managing that use through water demand management mechanisms, which is how we manage it, then they will have something to say.
But this is the point. If the cost of supplying the infrastructure, if 2/3 of our water is for outside irrigation, It's not mandated by the Act.
Yep.
You've got no legal mandate provided, and the cost of doing that is more than twice what the cost of not doing it is. Why would you do it?
So the question I would have is that the item we're talking about, how is that currently covered in the council's plans?
Well, it's different because we're not mandated by the Water Services Act.
No.
Yes, we are.
It's your demand management.
Yes, we are. Here we are.
But the reason why I asked the question, maybe I should go to the reason why I asked the question, is that, what we're trying to do is deliver, on what the regulatory regime is asking us and on what your aspirations are for Queensland Lakes District Council. So is this something that's captured in those aspirations?
Right.
Our job is to balance all these things, right?
I suppose that's
the
what
best
I'm asking
outcome
is-
possible.
I think it's demand management. Have we covered that adequately?
Well,
So
the
this-
question
Do you
is,
want us to put something in the statement of expectations? Is that what we're getting at?
I'm asking further advice on it, but I mean, as I said, it was just reminded this morning. I raised it when we originally agreed to set up this services, but
I think it is really important that we focus on the regulatory regime as one aspect. Your plans are another aspect. And at any time, so if you're captured in there, it's captured in our obligations. And if at any time you think there's something new coming up, then you've got the mechanisms to raise that and ask us to reflect it.
So can I just check though, Quentin, your concern is that at some point in the future, the water entity would say, we are not going to supply enough for this.
but they don't have to.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
is your concern that they will at some point make a decision not to?
Well, I'm saying that they could make a decision not to.
Yeah.
And if there was a financial reason to do so, maybe, and that our community would be left without having irrigation supply.
Well, I think, we've come to the street second, but just to, is maybe the scenario that the water regulator says that by building the infrastructure to the size that we are doing, just so people can water their gardens, isn't the least cost option. So maybe there's the financial directive to actually downsize to what is, you're putting pipes in for what is reasonable for people to use for their drinking water and their household water. So that might be.
You can certainly make decisions about prioritising or about not prioritising works that were, if an area had enough water for drinking water, but didn't have enough for the irrigation, but someone else needed water, you could easily prioritise.
So I think it's worth noting though, that if we weren't setting up a water CCO, the regulatory environment you're talking about applies to us. And we are already doing work on water demand management that will, in all likelihood, if it was going to see its course with us and not with the CCO, would result on us putting in place mechanisms to either reduce that irrigation demand or have people pay for it, which gives.
That'd be our decisions to make around what level of service.
No, they will be subject to the same regulatory regime and legislation.
But the point is that we're only handing off the provision of water services under the definitions of the Act. We're not handing off more than that.
Can we see what Sinead's got to say?
We have to make other choices because we're making.
She make it illegal.
Yeah.
Well, the only point I was going to make is just that with the transfer agreement, there is the opportunity, not just the opportunity, there is the requirement to list the specific responsibilities that are being transferred. So that includes the statutory responsibilities being transferred, the operational, the management and so forth. So if there's any concern, I suppose, as to the scope of the responsibilities transferring, it would be in that agreement that you would get the clarification.
Well, that might be the answer, is we just define it in the transfer agreement that includes water services, including all domestic supplies for irrigation.
That is
That's
the
why I
intent.
these documents, because I was wondering if those things were captured somewhere where we're required to reflect.
Well, I don't think we ever mandated ourselves in policy to providing irrigation supply, put it that way. So there's.
To what extent?
No,
It might be
that's
considered.
that's the demand bit, and we talked about that this morning about the demand management, which isn't the best work.
In the trade-offs.
And I think
We don't want people
you'll be wanting us to do that.
Yeah, we don't want them to use too much water, but we want them to be able to grow a garden.
I'm just mindful of the time that's been going now, and we've still got the constitution. Have you got any?
I've got, to skip to the constitution, I'm quite happy there. I'll send some other.
Yeah.
The one thing I was going to do with certain expectation was, would anyone object to having like an annual meeting between the risk committees of the different organisations, our risk committee, their risk committee, no decision making, like a workshop, just to, because we have group risk to consider, and it would be really helpful if there was a good relationship between the two. We do the same with QLDC, so.
You do that with QSC?
Yeah, we have done biannually. There's a sort of a question around it, but
What's the group risk?
group risk is the group risk of the council control organisations and the council. So that's a thing. The auditors consider us as a group. So there is group risk, there's group finances. There's no one know what I'm talking about. It's concerning. So yeah, I just wondered if there was an issue with that in front of the other councillors, because you can just send something through.
So something around where a risk committee may exist in the water services CCO annually.
Yeah, I suppose if there isn't one, if they haven't established a risk committee, it could be the board, just to discuss.
I think there are two. The reason I'm pausing is because we already have in here 2 meetings between the board, the full board, and the full council. Yes. And I would imagine that part of that discussion would include key risks. I would have thought there'd be a report there that would cover the range of things that we wanted to discuss between us.
We had 3 independent members on our risk insurance committee for a reason. So we use their expertise that we don't necessarily have sitting around the council table. I think they would work really well with the risk expertise that's on the board, and look, we could have a discussion about it and what it might include and whether it would be of value. I just wanted to raise whether there would be a major objection to considering it. Okay, send something else through, and I'll have a talk. We can talk about it our work induction and send something.
Yeah. So with the moving on to the constitution.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So this constitution isn't any different to the previous one you received, other than the fact we've just talked about that require amendment, and we'll add a dispute clause. So the associated dispute clause that we talked about, that whole section will update. So was there anything else in here that you wanted to address? Because this is due to come back to you for approval.
Oh, constitution.
Mm.
Yeah. So one, you've got the numbers wrong. That was my first thing. Minimum of 3, maximum of 5. We had minimum of 5, maximum of 7. I think.
No, I don't think that's
resolution, and it was 5.
Yeah.
It was 5.
Yes.
We thought we had room for 2 extra.
Yeah, that's right. Who chooses?
No, I think it was, if you want to change the number, you can change that in the resolution. But the minutes, well, I did check the minutes.
But if you want to change it to 5 to 7, this is another resolution when you approve this, if you want to approve that. But I think there was quite a lot of discussion about that, and there was a lot of advice around not having a board that was too big.
It was around the 3/4 and the quorum, and Steve was really good with the nets on figuring out how it would work. But
well, if you want it, well, now's the time. We can write it in here.
I had thought the discussion was a minimum of 3. I can't recall whether we actually said a maximum of 5, but I think we thought 5 was best anyway.
I think for establishment, that's
for
where.
establishment it was 5, but
Yeah.
beyond that,
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Just one
that was.
this one we allow it to be a maximum of 7.
We have
7, but
just give it a bit.
gives you the option.
Just
still
to
gaps and
If
flag.
Julian,
Yeah.
Julian comes to us and says we need another person with this skill level, I want 6, then we've got the opportunity to do it. So if we say minimum 3, maximum 7.
So to be in another resolution.
the other big thing I had in there was just around the shares, the issuing of shares. Now, the thing that got me there is, we're the only shareholder, we don't want any additional shares, but what it does is allows with council agreement. Now, my concern is that if someone was interested in purchasing shares, it becomes a confidential discussion. It's commercially sensitive, and that can be done behind closed doors, and it has been in the past with the airport. So I'm just wondering why we've got the ability to issue shares in there and whether it wouldn't be better, and well, I may be wrong, but whether it wouldn't be better to remove all of that stuff entirely to keep it really simple. Oh, sorry, Constitution, section 4, 5, voting.
I think this relates to,
You have to have shares.
you have to have shares.
But it's at the issuing of shares, and
So they have to issue shares in order for us to own them.
And that's just part of the transfer
Okay.
agreement. Sinead might.
Yeah.
so
Sinead and Mike
I
might.
guess my broad concern is that I wouldn't want a council to be in the position of having to consider whether to sell shares behind closed doors. All of a sudden, it opens up and the community becomes a little bit. Shares have been sold down. I would prefer that we have a discussion about whether we add the ability to sell shares into the constitution, because that would have to then be a public discussion. And then you would then take the next step to sell them. It would just preserve the ability to do things in public and not force a requirement to do things behind closed doors, and then the public suddenly made aware of that.
So we have a requirement that no discussions can be had about amalgamating with another water entity or taking over the water services of another council, etc., without discussion with you.
Yes, but that's the point, because if we did start to talk about it, it would possibly be if an offer was on the table, and if an offer was on the table,
They can't go to any discussions with somebody else without talking to you about it first.
but it may not come to the company, it may come to us. I don't know. I'm just wondering why it's in there. I don't want you to have a big long argument over it. I just wanted to raise a.
Can you point to the exact clause you're talking about? Because Sinead would probably be able to answer your question.
Can I talk to this? Could I
Or
talk to
John
this?
or Mike, so
Yeah,
Thank
sure.
you. Thanks, John. Yeah, sorry, my camera's decided not to work again. Sorry about that. It's clause 4.3, I think, issue of shares. But doesn't this go back to the conversation earlier in the piece, in particular in relation to potential amalgamations of local authority and potentially water CCOs? And it says specifically, the board may issue shares only with the prior approval of the shareholder. So there cannot be any conversation about selling any shares until we as the shareholder have agreed that conversation can start, is how I read that, but I'm happy to have other views on it.
If I can just, I didn't have, John had his hand up first, so I'll go second in line here. This is a standard provision that just reflects the ability of the board to issue shares on the shareholder's instruction. But as just John pointed out, any change to the shareholding arrangements is something that would trigger a mandatory consultation requirement under the Act, which is why the reference there to and the LGWS Act is included. So it's not entirely clear to me what the concern is here, but what this provision aligns with is that there does need to be a shareholder decision to allow any substantial change to the shareholding if it's to be by amalgamation anyway.
The board is just the thing that acts, right? That actually physically does the mechanistic part once a decision's been made.
It's just a
Shareholder.
concern that we might be in a position where we to consider something outside the public. But thanks for reminding Mike, that's great.
We definitely had at the forefront of our mind the situation a few years ago with the airport to ensure that this was set up to prevent that from happening.
Stephen.
It's a slight concern with clause 3.3, which is the ability for the council to audit for independent view. I just wonder whether there needs to be some guardrails there, that it just can't be used sporadically or randomly and actually needs some basis to be implemented. Because it says it's all at the company's cost.
It's a huge concern to me because, as we've said, while we might all get on really well today, what happens tomorrow? And this could be hugely disruptive and costly.
yes.
So I was thinking.
Interestingly, we on a trust, we actually have a thing that any of the trustees can issue an audit. You request an audit, but it's within certain timeframes, so that they're limited. It can't be more than once a year or once every 2 years or something. It's like there's limits on it.
Well, that's kind of where I was getting to, whether there was either a limit on the number that could be done in any 5-year term, or whether it had to be, you know, for example, on 3.3A, should we only be able to require an audit if we believe that strategy is contrary to our statement of expectations, or some guardrail around there that says that's the only reason we can do it. We can't just do it randomly and force that time and cost onto the company.
We could come up with something a bit tighter to shore that up a bit.
There is public opinion as well. I mean, it would be knowing that it would cost the ratepayers and still our ratepayers. There is that pressure to not add cost when not necessary, I think.
Although I would just remind you that the water services strategy is the water services CCO's equivalent of the LTP, and the LTP is audited.
I was going to say, what's the audit?
So essentially the water services strategy is not audited. All this clause allows you to do is say, we would like, no, not out of sequence, just audit it when it's produced. You have to audit it when it's produced. The water services strategy is a 3-yearly, yeah. And so this is just allowing you to request an audit like the audit that is mandated for the LTP. That's what the clause is about.
I mean, but it had this extra independent review. If you recall
and then we had the
conversation around the review of the effectiveness of the strategy.
And the C gives a broader scope to say you could review a part of the water services strategy, or you could be looking at effectiveness in between the 3 years, which is allowed for under the legislation.
Just trying to make sure we're not.
Catherine and Mike are lining up.
There's a way the other way as well. It's that balance of retaining sufficient power to make sure it's protecting the rights of the consumers. If you had a board that was going rogue, you would never do it if you think, you know, there's good relationship. These are safety clauses, and if you don't have them, then you don't have them when you need them. But you never need them in good times. And I just, these would have to be considered in public. You know, it would potentially raise the cost of, but you would do it if it was absolutely necessary.
So Mike perhaps was going to answer this. Sorry, Catherine, to skip over you, but I'm just going to ask Mike. I have a feeling you don't need to put this in the Constitution to be able to do it, because it's under the legislation you have the power to do it. But Mike, could you have a comment?
Yeah. Well, firstly, apologies, Catherine, you won the race with your getting your hand up, but to the extent that there's a question, what I've heard is there's a couple of different lines of thinking coming through in the questions here. And it's important, I guess, to understand that the role of the audit is in section 239 of the Act. Now, it's the same type of audit as councils will get for their long-term plan. So it'll be on whether or not the strategy gives effect to its purpose and the legislation, and the quality of it'll be an audit of the quality of the information and assumptions underlying the information in the strategy, but it's not allowed to comment on the merits of the policy content of the strategy. So if the council is concerned about whether or not the water service strategy actually gives effect to the statement of expectations, that's where the independent review clause comes in. So you've got a stepping down in effect. You've got the first thing, the council can require the company to obtain an audit. Now that'll be the audit that I've just described there, focused on the usual financial information and assumptions. If there's no require, you can request require the company to request. But in that third category, you've got the ability to arrange an independent review on whether or not you are in fact seeing a strategy that gives effect to certain aspects of the statement of expectations. That was the way we saw it being reflected based on the workshop guidance we got first time round. So I thought that'd just be useful to understand how that works. But I kind of see that these provisions work in tandem with the council's ability to request amendments to the SOE as well. And that they're a fail-safe or a safeguard to say, even if they don't get accepted by the company, or if the council agrees but is not entirely comfortable, you can use this power to get an independent review of certain parts of the strategy if you think that is warranted at the right time. And now this is obviously a new relationship that you're forging here, so you'd like to think you don't need to go to this extent, but I hear that from the elected members around the room, it's important to have these powers just sitting in bay in case you do need to exercise. So I'll defer now to Catherine. Put my hand down.
The only comment I was going to make was that remembering the first workshop we talked about an audit is looking at the controls, and that the officer of the Auditor General is the one who appoints the auditor, and you have to give them 1 year's notice. So it's not something that you do on a dial. It's something that you have to really think fairly and long term.
And this is a duration of 3 years.
Shareholder reserve matters.
So sorry, we're happy to just leave those. We reserve the power to ask for an audit or review. Excellent.
There was a good suggestion about, is there any further definition of what would be reasonable trigger?
That could be,
Or could we work something
yeah,
out?
and maybe this could be part of the informal disputes resolution process, or might take a year. And the other thing is just whether, I mean, council has its LTP audited as we're required to. Would the CCO, what auditing would the CCO be doing as of right?
None,
None.
unless you put this in place.
Yeah. So would you, as a board chair, would you be comfortable running an organisation that has no audit?
When you say none, we would have our normal annual audit.
Oh, sorry.
We'd
Yeah.
have the company.
The annual report would need to be audited.
Yeah.
So,
Sorry,
yeah.
not of the planning documents though.
Okay.
So my answer would be yes. I would be.
Yeah. Sorry, no audit of the planning documents. Yeah. Which is actually usual outside of local government,
Good.
just to be clear.
Yeah. And-
Usually
and-
audits are only
Well,
at the.
and in addition to that, all of the regulatory requirements we have to meet, we're going to be held to account.
Which is presumably why there isn't a requirement for the water services strategy to be audited, because it's subject to economic regulation and oversight by the Commerce Commission, which we don't have on the LTP.
So we're okay to add a trigger, what a trigger or triggers might be?
But does the
I
act,
think that
does
should be
the
outside of
act
this.
allow us to do it without a trigger? Regardless, so why would we add a trigger? Because you can't limit yourself if the act allows you to do something. Like,
I think you would all, as a council, you would have to agree that there is something that means that you want to request it. So I think you bottom out whether there was an issue.
It's a lot of hoo-ha to get something through, so.
You wouldn't take it lightly.
Okay, moving on.
I look to add something to the shareholder reserve matters.
What section is that?
It's schedule 2, right at the end, last page. There's a list of reserve matters, amalgamation, major transactions, all of that stuff. But we still haven't got in there long-term contracts, which I've been bleating about for forever. Obviously the Act allows the services to enter into a contract for 15 years. So I could enter into a contract with Veolia for 50 years. I'm wanting to limit it to like 15, and if it's above 15, we approve it, which seems to align with the sort of scale of other reserve matters. I don't see it as an outlier. It feels like it fits. But if interested in discussions on the term, could it be longer? Could it be 20? Where the council is comfortable, but I'm not comfortable allowing water services CCO to enter into 15-year contracts. It should be fairly obvious.
Do you think it's necessary to be explicit, given that you'll have the significant engagement policy?
Yes.
There'll also be delegations in place.
No, yes, I do. I mean, I really think this is important. This is 50 years is a very, very long time. That would effectively make, just the board become unaccountable. I mean, they're locked in to existing contracts, the ability to, get better with procurement and deliver better outcomes. I mean, it's just not there for them. Would you even attract new members to the board who were of the kind of mindset that you were interested in if they were locked into a contract that was decided by someone 30, 40 years ago?
I hear the concern, but my question would be, in reality, is there any evidence of any companies doing contracts to that length?
Then why would you not put it in there? You're not risking anything.
Yeah, but just
question that comes to mind
They
is
put it
that,
in the Act.
I mean, we've talked about this a little bit before. Maybe there is a case that a design, build and operate contract is actually beneficial, and that requires a long-term thing. And I mean, I don't disagree that it might have to come to us, but we should be in a place where we consider those. I mean, dare I say it is that we've got potentially more accountability if we've got design, build, operate than we do with the, operate our existing asset type contracts. It's
just a case of what's such a scale that should sit in
obviously
shareholders. And like I said, I'm not going to die in a ditch over the exact term. Happy to have the discussion, but I am not comfortable leaving it at 50 years. It's the last government shrunk it from, what did they shrunk it from, 30 to 15? So under the RMA changes.
Much experience overseas with those large contracts about the time length that you need to be operating in.
It always depends on the scale of investment. What's a reasonable period to recover that investment. The challenge, I guess, is if you go too short, then they'll drive the asset incredibly hard. So you've got to find the right balancing point. I hear the concern, and I just wonder whether it falls under the major transactions, whether there's or whether it falls under the delegated. No, not delegated. No, major transactions, maybe.
It's what it's capital or if it's an operating. So if it's an operating cost, so your capital heavy and major transactions, I think, is related to your assets.
But that's the dollar value that's set by your assets.
Your assets.
It's
so
not
we have
specific.
The asset value is massive, which means that the major transaction, would take quite a lot to get to major transaction if you were outsourcing, asset management. Let's say you work for a 50-year contract, it wouldn't reach the threshold of a major transaction, and you'll be outsourcing a core function there. So
the only long-term contracts, and the question in my experience, are ones where you're getting a large piece of infrastructure built, because you've got to have a return over time. Otherwise, it just won't stack up.
So I guess the question is, how do we put some limits around? So any board, not this one, but any board that turns up in the next, I don't know how many years, and the council's taken its eye off the ball because everything's been running, and they all of a sudden decide, hey, we're going to enter into an operation contract for 50 years, and goes nowhere near the level of major transaction given the scale of the capital assets, and but someone got a hand up.
Yeah, Mike has. Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, thank you all. I think on the major transaction point, we're probably struggling to get to that level. I mean, a major transaction is defined, involves an agreement to acquire assets which are more than half the value of the company's assets. Now, we don't yet know what the valuation is of the assets that will be transferred to the company, but you can be safe to assume it's going to be a pretty significant number. But just in terms of whether, there's two options really which are on the table here. One is to include a sort of a duration limit on contracts and put it in the Constitution as a shareholder reserved matter, or, and this is coming back to a discussion we had at an earlier workshop, you can ensure that the significance and engagement policy includes criteria that address some of the issues that Nikki has raised. The relevance of that being that if you've got these criteria, one of which could be a 30-year period limitation on a contract, any potential contract that's in excess of that would be significant and would require shareholder approval under Section 23 of the Local Government Water Services Act. So there's an inbuilt safeguard there for particular types of contracts that would be considered significant. So I'm just saying there's these two options. Nikki's preference, but I understand, would be to put it in the back of the Constitution. The other would be that the significance and engagement policy addresses the same point, but in a different document that has to be approved by the council anyway.
I just do both. I mean, if you're happy with the principle, then why not put it in the shareholder reserve matters? I don't know the details around whether there are any weaknesses to the route of putting it in the significance and engagement policy. I'm not sure, but if you're happy for it to go, if you think it will have the same effect, why would we not put it in shareholder reserve matters? It's in the Constitution. And it doesn't, and then it's enduring. It doesn't change. The shareholder thing comes up for renewal and gets rehashed. The whole point is if you've got something that needs to stick, then you should put it in the constitution. And that would be my argument. I'm really interested.
Okay, John Mitchell.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I agree with where Mike's suggesting there. I was flicking through a range of other legal opinions while the conversation was going on. Particularly if we have a concern about limiting potential future cost increases for water users, then limiting the time frame for contracts in the Constitution may not be in the interests of our residents and ratepayers. So I think we need to leave it open here, and the advice I've seen elsewhere suggests that the significance policy is where this should sit, and perhaps put some parameters in there with a trigger, as Mike suggested, at which we would then consider whether it would be appropriate or not. But to shut it out or to limit it at this point, could potentially not be in the interest of anyone. But I absolutely agree with what Nikki's saying about the concern about some of these arrangements being virtual ownership contexts. But I don't think this is where it should sit.
Sorry, I don't think Nikki's suggesting that contracts above a certain length of time are prohibited. It's just saying that that should be an explicit, and it could be that there's something could go in that shareholding reserve thing. What I would expect is that the significant engagement policy would be give more space to be more nuanced about the type of things, the type of contracts, and whether that's design, build, operate, or contract for services, or whatever. So go both ways.
Yeah, and I'm just.
Yeah, great.
I don't think, personally, I don't think it should go in the Constitution. I think what's proposed around the engagement policy is a way to handle it. I think in the Constitution, you've got, the directors owing duties to the company and to the stakeholders. And I think to try and limit it now without, I have personally no opinion at the moment as to whether 15 years or 35 years or 50 years or 100 years in this particular sphere is worth considering. And my trust is that we have appointed a board who knows what they're doing and knows that the duties that they have, and that they will act appropriately.
There we go.
So where does that leave us with what we're bringing back at a meeting for approval in 2 weeks, 3 weeks?
My reading would be that we will support around the table for it being in the SOE.
Okay. SOE.
So that's
Significance and engagement. Yeah. S and A.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on PPEs, joint ventures, those sorts of things? PPPs.
Yep. So
Helmets and goggles.
So H, material changes
There-
in nature.
there are additional requirements in the legislation around PPPs that would need to be addressed before they can be entered into, where there is a need for advice to be sought from a relevant central government agency, appropriate experts in the private sector space, etc. So that's a key part of the legal framework now, Nikki, that would need to be picked up through any decision the company wants to make that is considering a PPP approach.
Thank you. So.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
One more, and it's just a note. I think it's item 11. From my experience, limiting board terms to a maximum of 2 terms is quite. It's limiting you.
Yes.
I know the government guidelines are generally 2-3-year terms, but I know that often circumstances they go beyond that. So I would suggest, just as a permission, that you would change that to 3 terms, certainly.
Well, the other comment that I had about that clause too is that it didn't allow for rotation. Because we talked about being able to rotate a bit more, whereas this has just got everybody finishing 3 years and 3 years and 3 years. So that was my other, so.
We just need to relate.
It doesn't, it's still up to us to whether we extend it.
Yes,
Anyway, so
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
it doesn't give an automatic right of renewal.
You might not even get one term sometimes.
I think it's
Just got to keep the trust up at 1 year. Because of the constitution.
Why would you not reappoint them if they were doing the job? Well,
Yeah, I
if you
don't-
don't want to be.
Well, the counter argument to that is you've got to have, you can't have someone being able to stay there, indefinitely.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen some, we've seen some, and chief executives, VDPs, be there for 20 years, and you have to question whether, there is a time that needs some change.
So in terms of the rotation,
Up to 3 terms, yeah.
the constitution allows for that because this is enduring, whereas that only applies to the appointment of the establishment board. And so what was discussed in that previous workshop was the establishment board would have staggered terms. They wouldn't all be 3-year terms. So that's actually something that needs to be, I'll work out who to talk to about that in terms of the board director appointment process. Because that's something that you need to discuss in terms of the.
So we don't lose everyone at once.
Yeah.
No.
And I think the discussion we had at the workshop was some were shorter and some were at 3. So there was some were at 1 and like 18 months and some at 3.
I wouldn't do that, sorry.
Yeah.
I would suggest that the establishment board is 3 years unless we don't perform, and that then the renewals are staggered post that.
Yeah, that's exactly.
That's what we had. In which case that does need to be in the
Appoint someone for
constitution.
18 months.
Yeah.
But at the end of that 3 years, some might be appointed for 2 years and some might be for 3 years.
Yes.
So that you can get some staggering counting after that.
Yeah, okay, so that does need to be in the constitution then because.
Okay. No, it's a term no more than 3
Yeah,
years. You can
no
have
more.
any term.
Yes, no, it doesn't. Yep. Just have to remember to do it.
Yes.
All right, so we're happy with the constitution. So the statement of expectations, I think he's going to send me some detailed feedback. You might.
Well,
I'll send around an updated version. And then unless people want to talk about it again, then we might be done with that as well. That would be still.
Yeah.
Okay, shall we,
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Great job. Stop. All right.
yeah, we're already running half an hour late.
We're running half an hour slow.
Have to be a super quick conference, yeah. Yeah.
Sugar, thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Superiority.
All good.
Yeah.
There's only 11, there's only 11 in the package. There's only 11 in the package. Yeah.
Well, I can eat
Thank you very much.
Yes, please, John, over here would be good, thanks.
That's true, this here. Oh, his camera's up.
The remote cookies are good.
Just sharing the presentation, so I'll be right with you, but I'd like to come out. My name is Katie Russell, I'm policy planner with Allison Hutton. We're here to talk about the Pathway Southern Corridor today. We'll try to trim up our presentation to as much as possible.
That's fine.
Battle stop. Or maybe just give council,
Expected to.
council Grant a minute. Just Stuff? Yeah, okay. talk amongst yourselves. Okay.
All right, so to streamline the discussion today, I am going to focus on three or four key kind of aspects of the presentation. I'm going to take it as reviewed, but rather than read. But so the first thing we'll cover is context and reforms around resource management in general. Then we'll move on to discuss the Tatapawai structure plan briefly to give you a bit of background on it if it's new to you, especially. And then we'll look at our policy planning response options, and then we'll talk a little bit about plan making and our next steps. We don't have provisions here today. That's our next step over the next few months. We're going to get some additional reporting. So if we have time for discussion, we'll work in that space there. So over to you.
Cool. So just talking about the context of this work, obviously we are preparing a plan change to implement the Tatapawai structure plan. The Resource Management Act, as you all know, is being reformed, and new legislation is set to be enacted shortly. Something like it's going to be in August. So the work that's being prepared will be able to be implemented either under the RMA or under the reformed legislation. So that's the context that we're working under at the moment in terms of keeping the work going, in terms of the work to implement the structure plan. That's been obviously was adopted by council last year, but we're doing that work in a way that is able to be used either under the current act if it's kept, or under the new planning act if that is well sent prior to the election.
So the Tatapawai structure plan, what is it? It responds to the direction set by the QLDC spatial plan. It's a strategic document. It has a 30-year timescale. However, it's strategic, but it's underpinned by a substantial amount of expert reporting, as well as a lot of community consultation and stakeholder consultation. It was a multi-year project across all of council, so it's a substantial document that really shows where we're headed as a community in this area. It is an intermediary step between the spatial planning exercises and then the district plan, which is what our team does. The district plan implements structure plan by putting rules around how we develop in our communities. So they're both very integrated together, but important in and of themselves independently. The structure plan has a 30-year horizon with short, medium, long-term considerations. In terms of the Southern Corridor specifically, it anticipates between 9,000 and 10,000 dwellings and approximately 52 hectares of commercial and mixed-use development. This is over a 30-year scale. Its target is about 350 builds per annum in the Southern Corridor. So the scale that it's looking at is substantive annually and over time. We look at this as one of the last places to develop in an urban scale in greenfield settings within the Wakatipu Basin. So it is a really important area, and it was identified as a priority development area in the spatial plan. So there are a number of other parts of the district that are also priority development areas, which are now being structure planned as we speak, or some are, not all of them, but they will eventually. Since the structure plan was adopted, the fast track consent for Homestead Bay by RCL was approved by the government in February. The structure plan was a really great tool actually through that process to help influence and discuss RCL's development through the application process. And then it put us in a really fabulous position to really have a great conversation with the panel as they made their decisions. So it was a really great document for use through the fast track. So moving now to our options for implementation. So the fast track, the implementation plan for the structure plan identifies two plan changes. One is focused on commercial and residential, and that's the focus of this work that we bring to you today. We'll zoom ahead several slides. I might pause because I know I'm going really quickly. Were there any questions as I zoom through everything? Everyone's happy? In terms of options, we have sort of a series of options that go from do nothing to do quite a lot. And then we're looking at that in an RMA context. So the first option is the status quo, which would continue relying on the existing zoning and development controls. So it essentially allow for what's in the plan right now. So we wouldn't enable further development. Option 2 is some limited change. So this would involve some changes to the district plan at a lower density level, retaining the existing patterns more or less in the southern corridor. Option 3 is a coordinated development approach, which would rezone at parts of it for urban development, but also look at trying to create integrated communities as we work. It will require changes to district plan maps and chapters and include new provisions to address development. And option 4 would be a large scale comprehensive change, which would take in the entire corridor and look at a new planning framework for the entire area. If we're looking at really substantive changes in the district planning context. Our preferred option was coordinated development, so it's option 3 at this time. It enables development in suitable locations while managing infrastructure capacity and cumulative effects. It's trying to strike that balance between strategic planning, supporting well-functioning urban environments as defined in the RMA and in subsidiary acts, and it also is seeking to coordinate land use and infrastructure delivery. That's where we're headed. Thank you. How this might shape up. So this plan change is focused on the western side of the highway, where residential and commercial land is identified through the structure plan. The development areas at the back, I won't go through them, but you were all provided sort of those areas in a little bit more detail so you could get a sense of it, because I'm sure for context it's useful. But in essence, we're looking at commercial centers and land for housing in a variety of densities and provision for the blue-green network and open spaces, and possible, enabling of transport, particularly around public transport access and things like that when and where possible. We're also looking at a change to the urban growth boundary. The UGB means urban growth boundary down south. So key questions here are really, does this direction make sense? Do you have any questions about what I've said so far in the whirlwind tour of the RMA?
Yeah. Obviously, plan change, the zone rules.
Yes.
But under the new Planning Act, we won't know what zones we have available to use. So would we just take our best guess? Sorry, that's not being pejorative about that word guess, but how would we decide if we went through a plan change and came up with different zones and different rules? How would we make sure they're future proofed?
I'm passing to Amy.
Yeah, cool. So what we anticipate in terms of the standardised zones that central government is drafting at the moment is that will include different options. So we don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but certainly there will be high, medium density and low density, and possibly something in between, possibly something that's for tier 1 councils and tier 2 council specific zones. And you're right, we haven't got that confirmed at the moment, but this work will help us understand the appropriate density in each of these areas. So the recent urban intensification variation did introduce a high density A and medium density A zones to our district plan. So within the district plan zones that we have in the PDP now, we do have different options in terms of PDP zones that we could recommend could apply to certain locations. But this does need to have a Section 32 analysis, which looks at all reasonably practicable options, including the option of potentially having a special zone, which is what Jack's points on at the moment.
Through the chair, if I could add, we're also, through our relationships, managed to be lucky enough to be assisted in the MFE with the creation of standards for utilization. So that should ensure we're not too far off track, even though those benefits are under disclosure.
Good to know. And my other question was the difference between option 3 and option 4. Option 4 being the whole of the corridor. What was the biggest logic would say you do the whole thing? So why?
Yeah. Option 4 isn't necessarily about doing the whole corridor in one hit. It's not necessarily a spatial extent, but understanding that whatever areas we take, that we would go to the extreme and heightened density. So that would be, so it's about kind of looking at if you were going to develop, you're going to focus initially on that land use categories, which were commercial and residential, and enabling the networks and those types of things. So that's the focus of this variation. And then within that, are we looking at really big, huge, high heights, medium heights, low heights? That's part of it, but that's in essence what we're looking at, is kind of focusing within the land use types. How we use that land best, basically.
Again, I think we can answer another question you might have.
Sorry, yeah, John.
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, when I was reading through this, looking at the options and, having followed the trajectory of this over the last 15 years or so in particular, I was glad that option 3 was the recommended option because it was my preferred one. So I'm all for it. I think option 4 would bring about not only more uncertainty, but opportunity for some things that we might not really, that might get out of control. So I think option 3 is the preferred approach for us to have some control and to provide for continuity and leave our options open with the new Planning Act when it's actually passed.
One of my concerns is wastewater and how we choose an option now and start doing the work, not understanding where that's going to be disposed to. So how, I guess, given that, and not know for a while, and given the powering report and local government report making that, why now? What's the advantage? And I'm trying to remember that there was probably a decision just because we're getting options, but things are shifting at the time. So
the decision we made only related to applying to the minister for an exemption.
Right.
That's the only decision we made.
Yes. Yeah.
So why now?
It's a great question. So I think the first thing to know is that halting growth isn't really going to be isn't an option for our community, and we will always have to put our waste somewhere. So I think we both know that things are true. We all know those things are true. Additionally, we have done enough investigations through the structure planning process to date to understand the disposal for the amount of housing we need in our community overall won't be able to be contained within the southern corridor easily. That's what we know right now. And so further investigations are currently ongoing. So concurrent work streams are working on all of those options right now in terms of how to deliver great wastewater solutions for the corridor and other parts of the community too.
So are you going to progress assuming that it's going to cross the river and be disposed to a pit shower?
At the moment, based on the structure plan information, that's what the findings were. I do understand that the further work is ongoing because we are moving forward, and I would also say development pressure is ongoing, and right now we've got our CL obviously working in that space too. So it's a really great point. We're working towards it, but to achieve the densities that we need to in this area, we can assume that wastewater will be a part of the response.
Because this is the issue, right? Yes, we go the wastewater there is, the less of the ability to dispose of it.
Completely, yeah.
To land, and so we're making a choice by going for an intensification option that we are going to send it over the bridge into the river, and that's difficult, and that needs to be part of the decision making process, because we're at the same time going through a process where we're looking at alternatives and disposal to land, and at the same time the infrastructure team is looking at decentralised models, and at the same time we've got developers delivering those decentralised models, and so it's a really complex space, and I'm worried that it's going to be difficult to make the assumptions that you need to make to move forward with certainty.
Nikki, it is worth noting that the decision for this level of density was made when you approved the structure plan, because option 3 is
and I
based on
raised
structure.
Then that we were locking ourselves into a wastewater solution without any information about that in front of us.
And
so let's be careful.
The workshop you had this morning about the wastewater solution, the wastewater strategy takes into account Southern Corridor development. It takes into account potential decentralised options, and the Helen's team is working with RCL and on the longer term solutions for the Shotoga wastewater treatment plant to determine the right balance, and all of that is feeding into this parallel piece of work we're doing on the Shotoga wastewater treatment plant long-term solution. So it is all tied together, and you will have the opportunity to explore that in those future discussions.
Do we need to do this bit first, because this is the bit that to me should pop out of those decisions. So after we've landed, then we go, okay, these are our constraints, and then we progress.
Yeah.
And yeah, look, I just struggle with, I would at the moment be going for status quo, because at the moment it's delivering quite intensive development. There's an awful lot of houses going down there at pace. But anyway, open to hearing from others and
So we can find some comfort here.
Yeah.
Just a couple of things. I appreciate what you're saying, and the provision of infrastructure and timing and land use planning is always a chicken and egg, and I understand that, and council grapples with that every day. In terms of the Southern Corridor, just like Libby's Mile, these have been seen as priority areas within the spatial plan for some time. We are facing development pressure, and for council to step up and ensure that the land use provisions are well thought out and have some weight within a district plan structure is really important. Otherwise, we are on the back foot a bit in terms of a consenting process where they'll be coming in as non-compliant consents with an underlying zoning that doesn't match up the work that we've done in terms of our structure plan and our spatial plan. The point of this process and what we're doing is giving effect to that structure plan process where we had a lot of buy-in from both our development community and the community down there understanding what was happening, as well as giving us the opportunities through a land use plan where we can have triggers if that was appropriate. We can have rules like we've used within urban intensification to introduce matters such as matters of discretion on infrastructure. So we have some levers in terms of how development will progress. So it's really important that within these discussions, we do look at all of the factors, the land use planning, the infrastructure, the financial viability, who pays and when as part of the bigger picture. You can't see them all in isolation.
So I can't see who it is that's got the hand up on the screen.
Rometta's team.
Afternoon, Mayor, councillors. I'm Cameron Wood, Senior Strategic Planner at Council. It was our team that developed the structure plan, and we've got Katrina Lamont here as well, who's in our team who led the infrastructure provision. I think the structure plan sort of outlined the approach that we wanted to provide for Three Waters infrastructure, and there's a level of detail that's included in there about the preferred approach. We are currently working with RCL. They have their fast track consent that was approved, and in the conditions there were two options for RCL to effectively choose between their wastewater provision, whether it was on site or over to Frankton Wastewater Treatment Plant. They're currently going through feasibility and a process for looking at their on-site provision. We are still working with them around Frankton. The risk that we have is that there are other landowners who are equally wanting to develop, and if we don't get, I suppose, either an integrated response, as the structure plan says, we could get into a worst case scenario. So all of the factors as part of the plan change will look at the ongoing infrastructure provisions, whether it's Three Waters or transport, and how best to achieve that under the Resource Management Act and the existing district plan. And that's the process that it will look at. But things are moving quite quickly in this area, and we do need to make sure that the structure plan and its integrity and its integration is still being able to move forward over the next few years as development rapidly occurs in this corridor.
Sorry, if I may. Look, I get the whole, and support the whole comprehensive planning thing, but we've got to be careful as well, is that, and I've already said this today, which is that resource management's, as you said, lining up the resources, the infrastructure and the land use. And this was the first step. The master plan was the first step in doing that. It allowed us to comprehensively plan the infrastructure so we could then enable the land use. But the problem is we haven't got any further on our infrastructure. We just simply do not have anything in place to deliver the infrastructure that's required for this level of land use. Whether it's NZTA, whether it's, we've literally got $100 million roughly in year 8 of the long-term plan currently. This is a $2 billion problem. I'll call it whatever it is, $1 billion, 1.5, $2 billion. That's the scale of the problem we have to solve. Yet we just we simply don't have any answers to do that. And NZTA aren't any, well, subject to their strategic network review anyway, which we haven't seen. This had to be able to trigger answers to those questions, which it will do in time. But I'm a little concerned that we're ahead of ourselves without being able to answer those questions. So, like I said, I get the whole principle, I support the principle, but I want us to make those changes as we occur. But until we've got a development contribution system that works, and we've got NZTA on board, and we've got an infrastructure program that can deliver even a fraction of what is, I just am at a loss to what we're doing anymore, because unless we can align infrastructure, we're just, and look, maybe we can do that in the next 12 months. Maybe we can line our LTP up. Maybe we can, the regional deal will help NZTA get on board. But there is simply, the level of deficit here is beyond crazy. And I cannot reinforce how, we couldn't even get the A7 funded by NZTA. The smallest piece of the puzzle we couldn't get funded by NZTA. It was almost a no-brainer, and they just wouldn't even come to the party. So I don't know. At some stage, we have to draw a line saying, look, maybe this is the answer as we use this as leverage. That government, you want to unlock this growth, come to the party. We're ready to go. But until we've got something in place, I'm just, I've seen us leapfrog. We're sort of, talk about chicken and egg. We're sort of going chicken, and then we'll get to the egg. We're not going chicken, egg. We're going, we're just getting ahead of ourselves, and we just need something in place to deliver the infrastructure here. And without it, this is sort of, I don't know what we can do.
I could just through Chair, I disagree with the sentiment you're putting forward there. That what we're looking at workshopping today is how we manage the structure plan forward that the bank has been put in place. And the team has said the recommendation is to do a coordinated approach, do the underlying work required to get to a section 32, to look at the benefits, the costs, how those things are resolved, include stakeholders. It's about actually answering the questions you're asking, and that's the next piece, which is what the team has played forward here. All those issues are absolutely there, but this is the vehicle you use to engage the parties to move ahead. Without this, we have a risk of development going ahead. So we have already one fast track, and there's no reason to say the same parties wouldn't buy other parts of land, but other parties that may want to fast track areas of that Southern Corridor area. We have an EPA who's granting fast track consent without any infrastructure provision. So no on-site and no serviced vested assets, and telling developers to go back to council and sort it out. So what we're trying to do here is to get ahead of that, start engaging with stakeholders, doing the work that's required for the foundational understanding of what's required. So then we can move ahead.
I get that. That was the reason we did the structure plan for this. And
the structure plan, as you know, doesn't have all the way until we start doing the work.
Well, we have wastewater volumes. We've got, we can do some easy assumptions on that, and we just have to go. How would we service that? Can we service that?
And look at you're right that the investigations will reveal that. They're not going to solve it either, which is the problem. They're just going to tell us how big the problem is again, which is part of it. I don't know. As I said, I support the principle. We just need to find a way forward. And like I said, you take development contributions, whatever, you tally up the entire Southern Corridor, and as I said, you put whatever number against it. It's a big number, and then you divide it amongst the and you set a development. Maybe we use the development levy bill to lever that principle, because this is a the perfect boxed out piece of development that you could slice that pie up, you know,
we
pretty
have used
well.
planning mechanisms in the past, so I've shot over countries, a good example of work required in the state highway that wasn't funding available for. We got the rules in that plan that stopped development until that was resolved. It's just a very simple example from the last 15 years that we've used district plan restrictions to enable works to be done by private parties to continue development. So if the margins are there, if the developable land is there, if people want to go ahead and develop it, then they have to come up with solutions rather than a situation where fast tracks are granted, the developers knocking on a door trying to.
And just RCL's a perfect example is that we've got 20, whatever it is, 2,200, 2,500 properties that have no downstream transport interventions at all. No downstream transport interventions on a bridge that is already at peak capacity. And you know, so you know, I don't know what the solution is, but we need to somehow change the dialogue around infrastructure because that's
So I think it's important to note that the infrastructure plans are happening in parallel to this, and they've already started, as you know. So the regional deal is about a lot of that infrastructure. The integrated transport network plan that is flowing from the strategic network plan from NZTA will have the transport solutions in it. The triggers that Dave's talking about to build into the district plan should enable us to ensure that the land use that is enabled through the zoning can't happen until some of those infrastructure needs are met. But you're going to have some really difficult conversations when we get to the LTP about how we are going to fund the infrastructure required together with NZTA. Yes. But that is the reality because some of these developments are going to happen anyway through fast track. So this is trying to ensure that we've got a planned approach and that we can embed triggers so that the infrastructure is connected to it. But we've had a lot of conversations about the infrastructure plans that sit alongside this. This is not an isolation of anyone thinking about infrastructure. We're just coming at you from a different perspective.
What's the number coming? What's the number? Something covered infrastructure in the next 10 years.
Well, hopefully nothing because the developers might pay for it. So the whole conversation is
sorry,
that is
nonsense.
That's not what this
I'm
is
sorry,
about.
that is simply, it has to be in the LTP, regardless of how we.
Sorry, it's water, so.
Yeah, I think if we just bring if we can just bring this back. I guess my question, we know that most of the fast track applications that come through are paying they're complying with our district plan, right? That's why they're doing fast track. So why would we go to all this trouble and how long would it take for press go on doing a plan change now? It's what, probably a couple of years longer. So why would we do that when the fast tracks are going to come in anyway?
Yeah.
I don't know, just a rhetorical question, but I mean they put them in regardless.
The chair, the factory, the structure plan there was helpful. Because what the fast track we're looking for is enabling development in an area that can make that development. We had already structured plan an area to give the intent that we want this area to be covered by development area. Still the special plan through all the government documentation to come through. And the work on the plan change itself means that you have more weight to be able to provide to any fast track applications that are coming through, saying they're working in the direction to create what the government wants here. Don't need to steamroll over that and create something totally different. Because when you look at the Southern Corridor, we're at economies of scale of how to actually work as development can move forward. The Homestead Bay is an example, I think, where it did jump us, and if it hadn't, that would be part of the big picture of how an infrastructure solution can work between both developers. So having doing the work and the question about the plan change being in place, the plan change won't be in place before reform occurs. The work that we're doing to understand what needs to happen, how these zones need to develop, is the work that the team will be getting on with now. If council decides to go ahead with that process, then when the new framework comes, that work is still really valuable because it's the same foundational work that needs to occur to be able to move ahead with the new framework. And please, I mean, our role isn't to convince you of saying yes or no to this, just to share the information, and let you decide what you think is best.
Truly believe we need a proper joined up plan. Yeah, which is the question: is it relevant? Would I share your confidence in terms of the Burnhill fast track or the Morven Berry fast track? In terms of the value of our planning, I don't know. I guess we'll find out.
But to me, there's an element of being able to control the debate. And so if we put a structured plan, then we control the debate. And as Quentin said, then we highlight our deficit, which is massive. And in fact, if we don't, then everything will proceed anyway, but at least we can control the debate. And per your comments, do we have the ability basically to slow everything down, or this whole thing is stillborn if we can't get the infrastructure or a promise of the infrastructure?
So we have some land area history, sorry, Ken, got this. We have zone land throughout the district that we can't service now. But if a developer comes forward with a serviceable solution that works for council and gives us the opportunity to look at, well, if a solution is going here, we have land adjoining that we want to try and service. How do we get in an agreement to get a better deal for the community in terms of the overall?
So we do deferred zones anymore.
Excuse me.
We do deferred zones anymore.
Like deferred zones right now, we can. We don't know what's going to happen with the new legislation, but we also use
We progress this in deferred zones. So we're enabling the thing, but it's saying it's got to tick these things off in terms of funding the infrastructure and.
As you know, all those decisions will be in front of you as the.
You know, we've got to get something that gives us some power, and like deferred zone gives us some power because it forces them to the table for a development agreement or for some arrangement. Without that, we are just losing. You know, I mean, I know a deferred zone will have its specials, but at least it puts us on the front foot, you know.
Yeah, and it's really the work that provides all those options is what we look.
I mean, do you guys think a deferred zone is a real option these days? I know it's popular in the past, but it hasn't been done for many years. But well, that's why I asked, because it might not even exist anymore.
It is an option under the future urban zone. There's different words for it. It is in the national planning standards, so they are still a thing. And they are the framework that are being applied at the moment by central government in terms of guiding the standardised zones that are being drafted at the moment.
It gives us some protection from rapidly initiated plan changes, things like that, doesn't it?
In terms of plan drafting, we don't use deferred zones at the moment in the PDP at FSU, so we do write up the framework for that. So there'd be a fair amount of plan drafting.
I'm just trying to find a way to put us on the front foot because like I said, I know it's not popular. We've got to do something, got to break this cycle.
Well, I mean, the market's delivering something. The question is it what people need? Is it not what people need? What are the problems? Can we solve our problems by having good relationships and having these discussions? Structured plan's already been approved. You said it's useful. So we do have some tools. We've got good relationships, a structured plan. Development's happening, you know, lots of it. Potentially, you know, if they're going to go ahead, they have to provide their own infrastructure, what we can't afford and we can't sell.
Yeah, it's not for them.
I mean, you know, it's weighing up. There are pros and cons and risks and trade-offs, and it's a case of, you know, we have to wander through those and understand them, because we can't just proceed with this because the ideology is right. You know, we should be doing structured plans. Ideally, they're the best thing to do. Yeah, sure, but you know, there are all sorts of things that have to be able to happen, and if we're just not in that position, then we could be causing more problems than we're solving, and that's the risk. Just to be clear, so the structure plan has already been endorsed by the council, and this is the year one action that the councillors did agree to when they endorsed the structure plan, was to do a plan change to implement it and then to progress towards having statutory weight. So this is a direct result of the council decision to endorse the structure plan.
And there are many decision points on the way anyway.
Remembering when we did agree that, I'll put it plain, it was forcing us into a corner with wastewater disposal because it assumed no disposal in the southern corridor. And that was not part of the papers. That was not mentioned. It was not discussed. It was very clearly not there. So, you know, I'm challenged that the decision was made with the full information that we required to make a good decision. Wastewater is even
Sorry, I understand that comment. The information provided was all information at the time. In relation to the corridor, there was nothing not presented.
Yeah, no, but we were in the position of deciding on wastewater options that was up in the air, and was a decision.
Oh, sure. So, but staff gave you all the information we had.
And I mentioned at the meeting that this was going to lock us into discharge into the Charlotte River. It was going to require more land, which would lock us into a discharge to the river. Because if we had less wastewater to disposal, anyway, it was just didn't need to explain.
Just one comment to sort of take us back up to what your role is today. We have a spatial plan. We have a Grow Well partnership. The Southern Corridor has been part of that spatial plan as a priority area for quite some time. The council has already expended significant resources on a structured planning process to ensure that as much as possible we get efficient land use within the Southern Corridor. As Katie highlighted before, it is one of our last greenfield areas within our existing urban growth boundaries. So it is important that if we can, we apply some statutory weight to ensure the effectiveness and efficiency of that land going forward, because it will be a mechanism to hopefully get some housing right fit for our future community. And that might not be in single houses on sections, but it might be better and more well-planned density. These are the opportunities that we do have within this greenfields area. The team works really hard across council in terms of working with our reserves team, with our infrastructure team. We won't be bringing you something back to notify without having that cross-council understanding of the implications of that land use. But I do think that we do need to keep considering the appropriate land use for those areas because of the spatial planning process, because of the structured planning process, and because we are going into an RM reform system where we need to be prepared in terms of the appropriate zoning, that we will have a really concentrated amount of time to slap down essentially on particular areas around our district. So our job is to make sure that we are prepared for that, and we are looking at the land areas in question, what they need to be well functioning for those future communities. And I think that's what I'd like the conversation to be around.
So if we're to progress with the, you know, as you say, the development of the Section 32 reports or whatever, there'll be another decision, and eventually we have to make a decision to notify it. But I suppose, you know, from my perspective, I'm happy to proceed with that work because we have to be, like you say, you have to be prepared. But we need to have some options on the table that really include innovative ways to manage the infrastructure deficit and deferred zoning. Development, how the development levy is going to be applied to the Southern Corridor specifically, and I welcome a report on that alone, quite frankly, because if we can, as I said, we can box that out in a way that we can't in many other places. That we can really start to drill in what are the real costs, what are the opportunities for delivering infrastructure in different ways. And, like I said, I'm happy for that to proceed, but I'm not necessarily going to notify it until I've got some satisfaction we're going to address those problems, deferred zoning, those sort of things.
All frameworks within the plan. And I agree with you. And that is the purpose of this work, to ensure that we are lining up as much as possible. And that's with the work that Penny's doing. That's work with the reserves and open space team in terms of thinking about what we'll need to provide for that community in the time frame of this LTP and the next.
Yeah, so, just the purpose of this workshop is to get those type of ideas to say, hey.
But I'd signal that having worked in this district for over 20 years, there's a progression towards an acceptance of infrastructure deficit that is bordering on reckless. We need to flip that tune somehow. I mean, it is just, we've gone from being, making sure every lot could be serviced to not caring, quite frankly, and the government, I know that's driven by government a lot, but as to whether we can service it or not, we've got to pull that back somewhere.
So you will, at risk of sounding like I did in the last workshop, the infrastructure strategy, when you see it on the first session we have on the infrastructure strategy on the 30th of June, has a whole focus area that is on growth and the different options available to you in terms of servicing, sequencing, the different combinations for infrastructure, and that will link to, although in that first discussion, likely to the non-QLDC infrastructure, like the NZTA stuff, but that will come in a subsequent session. You'll have all the transport picture as well, which will come back. You will have seen that and had that in front of you well before these guys come back to you with the next phase of their work.
And just to reiterate the methods and provisions, so that's the kind of, deferred zoning type conversation that will come back with better information, more information, I should say, more information to help you understand where we're sitting with all these concerns. It will be integrated, obviously, with the Penny's just highlighted.
Just, I guess a question about zoning, there's anticipated densities, we've seen already the developer not wanting to go to the densities that the council had been suggesting they go to. So how do we make sure we get the density?
So district plans are enabling of development and not necessarily prescriptive of it. So Ladies Mile, that was an example where there were certain requirements for yields. That's the only example that I know of where our PDP is prescriptive of the yields that are required. It can be a tricky thing to do because then the district plan is then fixed for could be a period of 10 years, and it may be that the land isn't developed if you put too tight a requirement on. So having prescriptive provisions regarding density are something that need to be very carefully thought through.
How would you work out, going back to the infrastructure strategy, how do you work out what level of infrastructure provision you're going to put in if you don't know what level of density you're going to get on the land?
It would be modelled based on the yield anticipated by the district plan provision. So what's enabled by the district plan, there'd be a higher resource consent requirement if a developer is wanting to go due to a higher yield, so higher density than what's provided from provisions. Then infrastructure can be consideration through the resource consent process.
So I just add to that. So heights of buildings, footprints, amount of apartments you can get into, something that size is a maximum level of yield for a livable apartment. You can use those methodologies, which is what Amy's talking about in terms of what the plan allows. It allows certain framework of development, and within that there are sizes you can use to anticipate the amount of people, which then forms through anticipating the infrastructure requirements. And you can look at the maximums and then have a minimum for what council are looking for at that period of time or the community, and that may change over time provided it doesn't break the system.
Yeah, John Mitchell.
Thanks, John. Without wanting to divert even further off the intended topic here, I suspect some of the things, particularly that Quentin raised and others have raised too, mean that we need to do this work. We have to demonstrate that we are meeting our statutory obligations to meaningfully plan for reasonable development and use within our district. As well, though, I think the funding, the rating and revenue review we are about to really get into, and then into the LTP, is where some of these hard questions need to be asked. So if there is potential for areas to be developed, and it would incur infrastructure costs to do so at the level that is thought to be the most appropriate for those areas, but developers then don't choose to develop to that density, well, we should be considering whether they still be charged for that potential that the area was anticipated to have. So those sort of things need to be taken into account, which then gives more of a pricing signal to the market. The other part that I think we need to consider is every step along the way, and this is another opportunity to do so, to indicate that although we have new planning legislation coming in and the Environment Bill that is intended to be more permissive than the current arrangements, that doesn't change this context. It means that things will be happening at a rate that we have little control over. Then, though, we have a government that is pushing through with the fast track, which blows all of this out of the water. So it is reasonable to ask the question, what is the point? Well, the point is having a rational planning framework in place so that we can argue the case very effectively for a more consistent and affordable and sustainable approach to development in our district. So we need to do this, but we also need to, I think, lift the lobbying harder so that that government and whatever future governments are going to look like will take this seriously. And I understand that they are beginning to, and seeing that what's happening in Queenstown Lakes is highly problematic due to the agenda of the current government. So, and they're realising they need to change. So we need to do the work, we need to make the arguments stronger, and then we need to have the funding mechanisms to encourage the right decisions.
What's the cost? Budget. The cost to the community in terms of infrastructure, or the cost to
just the budget for doing a piece of work, yes.
And we are going out to market. A lot of this, pretty much most of the work has been done in-house at the moment. We will have to get a couple of specialist reports because we don't have those experts working within council. That's being worked through at the moment in terms of what we need for that, but possibly transport, urban design, and
transport, urban design. I've got economics on the list as well. So we've got a suite of expert reports. But like Ali said, it's a substantial amount of reporting supported the structure plan. So they're sort of more kind of refining these methods and provisions. And then obviously we would have hearing costs in the future, but we would come back to you and discuss that at that point in time. So between now and the next time we speak to you, it's reporting for underpinning the section 32.
A cost discussion would be different in relation to if it's a streamlined planning process or a council plan change as well.
Ballpark figure? No, you can't necessarily give me that.
To notification, because potentially another 100, no, I don't even think it would be that much, for between 50 and 100 at the most in terms of expert reporting to notification. Once you get to notification, you're in the rounds of how many submissions that you receive. If you don't get many submissions, it's an easier process. If it's a lot of submissions, and like the UIB hearing where we had 3 weeks of hearings across the district, it takes a lot longer.
And to get identification, UIV, with everything involved and the substantive letter, that would be between $800,000 and $1 million in terms of the cost. That's not what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
That's the entire cost for having 20,000 submission points, having to go through everything in 3 weeks of hearings. But that's where the substantive cost lies. So the initial bit of foundational work.
That's reasonable.
And there's also to be totally transparent, there's an internal staff time that's not in that 100,000 as well.
Yeah.
So,
And when you do that, when you scope those pieces of work, can you do it with a view to looking at business as usual discharge to land, understanding those options? I guess where I'm going is we want to have something that's useful, that covers the bases, not do a piece of work and then things have changed and then it's not relevant anymore, so we have to go out and do some stuff. And so can we make sure we just consider the fact that we do have a crunchy issue with wastewater discharge?
Yeah, I think that's, well, I know that is front of mind in terms of our understanding of what can happen here. And we have a lot, as Penny said before, we have a lot of internal resource in terms of understanding our wastewater system, where we're going, where the money is going, and what the best outcomes are. We are working within them for that sort of advice as part of this planning process, as opposed to something like urban design, where we don't necessarily have those experts on site.
So we don't have the answers yet.
Yeah, I know.
So it's got to sink in.
Speaking of answers, do we need to wait till that application is approved from MFB before we start work, or are we just confident that it will be approved?
No.
no, we don't, because again, if the reform occurs in the timelines it's intended to occur, this foundational work is required in any case to the statutory construction areas.
So it's a decision to agree to proceed. It's still fine regardless of.
Yes, we can proceed with this work. We're not notifying. The plan stop is about notifying.
And notifying a plan change or a variation is a decision of council. So we have that decision making process.
So the exemption application that's in is
that is to give you an opportunity when the time comes, if the minister grants the exemption, to proceed with the plan change on the basis that might have fears at that point in time as things develop that the reform wasn't happening to the timelines that it intended. We need to try and get ahead of developers.
start on the work. Yes.
Yes, it's very complex.
No, I'm just, it's just this whole get ahead of developers making up their own mind. At the end of the day, I still have some sympathy with that they understand the markets, you know, and they have a piece of land and they will be, you know, doing their best largely to provide it. And, you know, having driven around there recently, high intensity, density, they might not be up, but maybe there are ground constraints, maybe there are possible affordability to constraints. I just worry that we try and put these layers over the top because ideologically they're the right thing to do, but in reality for that particular place, particular ground conditions, it's not necessarily, anyway.
Yeah, look, I have to be pretty frank about this. Developers will go and try and maximize the profit. They won't try and maximize what we're trying to do with the actual intentional planning process involving our community to get the best options. So these layers you're talking about are absolutely the foundation of the first world planning and development. And for me, absolutely required to set our communities on the right path for kids in the future.
So I'm going to throw it one back and then comes back to, you know, I've got all those townhouses next to Back and Save and all the rest of that land was zoned to be 4 stories high and none of it is. You know, it's all 1.5 stories, you know.
Yeah.
So how do we want to put the pipes in the ground and the water supply and the sewers and everything at 4-story high? And yet we'll never see it.
Why do?
Well, I 2 things there. I think we possibly will, because that's one of the exceptions in relation to Franklin Flats. But again, I think to be very straight about it, the type of intensification of development in this district has been going above predicted levels for quite some time. Even the predicted levels from a few years ago on Ladies Mile are already being challenged. So we looked at the Ladies Mile area, though, excuse me, in terms of looking at what infrastructure solution can be put in, how are we going to avoid the issues you're talking about, was to put in minimum yield to say, this is what it needs to be, because if we're putting stuff in the ground, we need to be able to recoup.
But we've done plenty of planning for that, but I still maintain there probably isn't a good example of high density living in this district. In fact, there's very few in New Zealand, good quality high density living in New Zealand. There are some, but very few. and we still haven't had a high quality, high density living delivered in this district.
David, you mentioned a scenario with 20,000 submissions. Did I hear that correctly?
Submission points.
Yeah.
Submission points. Okay, fair enough. A debate once this plan is put in place, or once it is notified, correct?
And once it is notified, it gives people the opportunity. The urban intensification, if you think about it, just to be very clear, was a generational type of change that would require those amount of submissions. We wouldn't anticipate anywhere near that plan change to enact a structure.
And the way I see that is that will provoke a debate about the lack of infrastructure and the lack of infrastructure. And that if we get ahead of that and we overbuild the infrastructure or overplan for the infrastructure, that would be a positive. And for Quentin's point, and the infrastructure deficit and our growth rates, which we never recognize, and we always sort of tamp them down, that could be a good part.
Depending on it, it would be complicated in terms of the agreement, because what we don't want is put infrastructure in the ground that's completely underutilized that we've got to pay for, or has to pay for. So it's about the deals you do with people who you connect with, who want to develop the land, and those are the arrangements that occur to be able to get the best solution that isn't paid for by the community and is utilized to its maximum.
Okay, stupid question. When have we ever overbuilt or put too much in the ground or have unused infrastructure?
In this district, the way we've been developing, not often. Yeah. Possibly zero. There will be discrete developments, but generally, yes, the densities will increase because the margins there.
There is a stormwater pipe running through 3 parks that's not going anywhere. So,
yeah,
another topic to
we have. So, are you happy with the direction?
There was some really good discussion. What we'd say is that you do have the information and the full presentation that Katie was going to deliver. So please get back in touch with the team if you do have any comments, any suggestions, any thoughts. We will keep working with all of the parts of council and come back to you at a later date.
And smart growth as well.
Probably when the last time I did her, it's only just 6 or 3 years.
We can do some research. Yeah, we can do that. Yeah.
And smart growth obviously will be involved in
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, it's like all this.
Yeah, come on, let's, we'll still be here tomorrow. Hello.
Jane, do you drive or do we drive? You have to join the meeting and show the PowerPoint through your device.
Free for the week. Or biscuits.
I'm just joining the table to soak up your expertise.
Sure. Just want to be one of the gang.
Sounds good, thanks.
Too healthy. I decided. Thank you. I know you.
Yeah. You've got loads of work done. There we go.
This should be a lot later.
Shall we get going?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for bearing with us to the end of today. We actually put our names forward for this workshop because we heard there was nothing on the agenda. So context for us coming to see you today is at the end of June, you've got a steering group workshop about the infrastructure strategy. I don't know if you mentioned that or not. One of the things that we're intending to talk to you about as part of that initial conversation around the infrastructure strategy is your potential pathways that you can take for renewals. You know, spend an awful lot on renewing your assets, and it's not something we typically talk much about as part of setting up the infrastructure strategy and building the LTP. So as a bit of a precursor to that, we could just run you through how we build our renewals programs, start to socialise some of the strategic choices you have around those. And through the next conversation we have with you about the infrastructure strategy, you can start to set a bit of direction, and then we can go away and build up some of the community capital investments based on that. And what that means is we can give you a strategically aligned renewals program without having to go line by line detail at this time. One of the key things we're really keen to highlight today is the relationship between investment and renewals and your levels of service. So decisions that you make around your levels of service can help inform us in terms of what a really sound renewals profile looks like. So it's certainly somewhere where you have some choice, even if it's not immediately obvious when it comes to making decisions about your renewals investment. Now that I've said all of that, I'll hand over to the main event. I'm just here as the backup dancer, really.
Yeah, I think, thanks, Jessie. And yeah, it's really important context, but when we talk about renewals, trying to understand exactly what we're talking about. And I'm sure you've all heard the word renewals. You probably know what we're talking about, but we just wanted to be really clear about what we are. And renewals are the planned replacement or refurbishment of existing assets. So this is about retaining, well, actually that's a strategic choice about retaining service level, but it's just about ensuring the assets that we have are working. And we can talk about the choices that we have here. Just wanted to highlight that we have renewals in across all of our portfolios. Pre-waters we're not really going to talk about today, but mainly talking about transport, property and waste. And we put on here, I don't know if any of you remember or attended the Wanaka show a few years ago. We did this because we've got a lot of renewals happening on the Cardrona Valley Road. And this was a bit of a fun, on the right-hand side, you'll see the Can You Build a Road? And we had an interactive board where you could kind of look at the different levels. And I don't know if anyone saw that, but it's quite fun. I nearly brought it today as a bit of a breakout activity, but didn't want to distract you. But it just gives you a really, really good idea and understanding of those components versus the whole item being renewed. So, how do renewals influence service levels? What we've done, look, renewals play a key role in service levels, and we've used resurfacing as an example, and that kind of goes back to that Cardrona Valley Road example.
And we've picked some of the service levels that we have in the current, well, the proposed, some slight tweaks to the proposed LTP around the service levels. And you would have seen these when we talked about the activity plans. So we've just pulled out 3, which are actually really influenced by our investment in resurfacing and rehabilitations as well. But I just wanted to talk about the fact that we have a level of service and then we have an actual renewal activity, so the resurfacing, and we have the impact and what that does in terms of that levels of service. So the first one, roads are designed and maintained to minimise harm to all users. And there's a load packed into that, particularly around road safety on a road. We're talking about the fact that there might be bumps, the road might be slippery when it's wet. There are a number of activities that happen around that. You know, the surfacing is not completely the whole picture around safety, but it's a really key part because that's where the cars touch the road. And so we have that. This is a Department of Internal Affairs measure that we follow, and that is the risk of fatality and serious injury due to the surface condition. So we have there you can see a graph which is showing how we track on the different types of roads that we have, and that's using the One Network classification, One Network framework, and we can break down this to at a network level or an individual road category level. And what that does is just be able to connect the data that we have around road safety. The more you spend on the roads, the likelihood is that you're going to have safer roads to drive on or more comfortable roads. So that brings us down to the conditions provide a smooth and comfortable experience. So that's about how bumpy is our road. Now that's not all related to the surface of the road. There's a whole amount of things packed into there. But the whole point is that there are a number of conditions, activities that are influenced by the road resurfacing. Does this make sense to you? Like, is it, I don't know how much detail you wanted me to go into?
This is our data, or is that?
Yep, this is 100% our data.
I can't
Sorry.
understand that top one.
Okay, so that's just telling you the change over time of deaths and serious injury that happen on our network. So
there's primary collector.
So that tends to be the main roads that we drive on. So we have arterial roads, which are probably the highest volume roads that we have on our network.
So
on the primary collectors, yeah. So this is influenced by what we call the amount of people, vehicles, kilometres travelled, but the amount of people that use the road. So the more people that travel on our roads, the more likely we're going to have a crash. So it tends to look like that. Yeah.
I wonder if we had more roads, then less. Not so much about the level of service there, but is that also indicating that we don't have enough roads and it's too?
No. So this is purely just looking at the roads that we have and the risk of crashes that we're having on them. Well, that's not actually the risk of crashes, it's actually the real facts and figures. Yeah, trend over time. So that's purely looking at how is your safety performance tracking? Yeah, and the more people you have, the higher the risk of having crashes, but it's not related to do we have enough roads for that. In all honesty, when you have congestion on your roads, you're probably going to have less deaths and serious injuries because you're going slower, therefore the impact's less. Yeah.
But in most cases, the numbers of injuries have increased though. Is there a problem there that we've identified?
Yeah, so interesting, if you looked at the graph last year, it was looking really good and we had really controlled number of crashes, but we are over this last 12 months, we have actually seen an increase in the number of deaths and serious injuries. It's something that we just need to keep an eye on. For us, actually, we have pretty good safety records. So sometimes it's not necessarily statistically relevant or significant to look at us. So we tend to look at it at network level rather than drilling down into crashes on individual roads.
Trend in that 9 injury counts this year.
Sorry, what was that?
Is there any trend on the primary collectors? Are they on a particular road or a certain type of accident?
We can certainly look into that. I don't have that off the top of my head.
Anything like that?
Well, interestingly, yeah, and that's certainly part of what we do as part of the safety team looking at that. Most of our crashes happen on high-speed fast roads. So, that's certainly that doesn't include state highways, but actually we probably see our most significant deaths and serious injuries on that. So there is a key connection as well to our operational budgets, and so particularly around service requests. If we have really good roads and we maintain our renewal budgets, we can actually hopefully mitigate the need for a lot of reactive requests. So things like potholes, things like, you know, cracks and things on our network often tend to be some of the biggest complaints that the routing team sees. And keeping on top of our renewal budgets just means that we can not just reduce the cost of reactive repairs, but actually make people feel like they're driving and more comfortable on our networks. Any questions on that? Of this really just trying to help you connect that level of service and the activity that we're doing and how we monitor that.
That last draft around the request for service, is there any, I mean, give or take, you've resolved them within time, but is there any trend in the number of RFSs we're getting?
Oh man, it's really increased.
It's increased,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. There's certainly an increase in RFSs and complaints that we get, and that's across all of the activities. Yeah, certainly we've got pretty good response rate, but there's a lot of pressure on the operational teams to be dealing with that. So we certainly would like to make sure that that doesn't increase.
So what does the increase in RFSs tell you in terms of the problem areas? Are they new problem areas, or is it change in behaviour of people reporting them?
Yeah, we are talking about renewals.
We're not talking about roads.
Yeah. No, just quickly. Yeah, so I think we have a really engaged community for a start, but also I think what we're seeing with the kind of the change of land use and urbanisation, a lot of the complaints perhaps come on our more unsealed roads where there is a changing expectation around whether a road should be sealed, or they expect a certain amount, you know, signs and lines and that type of thing on the network, parking complaints. It's more probably about those extremes of urbanisation and changing land use. So what does that mean when we're looking at investing in renewals? There's a couple of choices, and what we've tried to do here, and hopefully this demonstrates that there are, we've kind of, there's a spectrum of investment, and you can choose to invest across your whole program, and you can choose to invest within your program. So we've talked about, we can take it's about your risk appetite. How much risk do you want to take? We can be higher risk and we can reduce the amount of renewals that we do. And there's a whole amount of issues and considerations that you need to take into account when you want to take that high risk and lower investment option. Then you could be a low risk and have a low appetite. We really want to have great roads. We want to invest and protect the assets we have. And there is, again, a load of benefits there, but we want to make sure that we're not over-investing and that we're giving the community a level of service that's actually appropriate and fit for purpose. So the approach that we would be recommending and wanting to talk through with you guys is taking a really balanced approach. And I'll talk through an example a bit later on. The key thing is to protect our critical assets, and we can take risk where there is opportunities to take risks. So for us, our road network, where we've got reseals and rehabs, our network has a lot of climatic extremes. We can, if we get cracks in our network and it starts to see failures, our roads will blow up really quickly. We have what's called freeze thaw. And so that means when water gets into the network and then it freezes, the water expands and it makes our roads basically fall to bits in, very, very quickly. So we want to make sure that our roads are kept really waterproofed. And we can do that through the renewals program. So that is one that I would really never recommend you skimp on. But there are some assets where we can just run to fail. We have things like signage on the network. We don't need to strategically plan and put signs in place. So we can actually sweep them. And you've probably heard that term used, and sometimes it is a bit overused. But you don't want to sweep your critical assets, things like bridges, things like, the road network, key facilities like the event centre, they are really key parts of our community. And we want to make sure that we protect them. So within our whole portfolio, we can take that balanced view and make sure that, we can take that balanced approach. And what you'll see for the level of service is that, for a high risk, low investment, you're potentially going to reduce your level of service. But for your low risk, high investment, you're going to choose all of your assets. And so it's where do you sit on the spectrum of which assets do you want to protect and which are you prepared to take a slightly higher risk appetite.
Your most critical assets are always your most expensive ones, though.
That's true, yeah, yeah.
So if you skip on them, basically what you're saying is don't skip on them.
Yeah, and there's a huge amount of investment. You know, we've spent billions of dollars up, you know, roading portfolios probably close to 2 billion, you know, water's probably over that, below your building costs. So you need to make sure that that's protected.
With roading, now that we've moved to chip seal though, is that going to create more renewal costs?
Well, no, the idea is that it will reduce your renewal cost because you can cover more of the network for the same dollar than you would with asphalt.
It doesn't last as long.
But it doesn't last as long, yeah. So you just need to keep on top of it and keep a, you know, good renewal rate.
I guess I would just pause at this moment and say these were the scenarios we were looking to unpack as part of this initial conversation around the 30-year infrastructure strategy. So it would be really helpful either at the end of this conversation or following it if you've got any thoughts around the extent to which that's useful. And I say that because what we're looking to do with the infrastructure strategy is lift some of these kind of key cross-cutting decisions like growth, like resilience and climate adaptation and renewals right up top, so that when we then set the strategic direction for your activities like transportation, waste, social infrastructure, it's done within that context. So if you say to us we want to pursue a balanced approach for our renewals, then we'll distill that across all of our activities.
So when we talk about funding depreciation or reducing funding depreciation, this is part of what you're talking about.
Yes and no, it's more of a financial decision. We had we grappled for a while on whether we included a slide on funded depreciation. We decided to steer clear. Funded depreciation doesn't really need to factor into how much you choose to invest in your renewals right now. It's just going to shift the balance on how much you borrow versus how much you reserve you're about to do it. And that's why we've said that feels like more of a financial conversation for you to have than with us.
I think it's right. I mean, this is from an asset owner, asset manager perspective. You've got some choices here, which is, but not the funding question, which is pretty critical. But if you, that's what this is presenting. You've got some choices based on the fundamental asset condition assessments.
It would be nice to have some sort of idea of what balance means to you.
Yeah.
So, you know, yes, we can say balance sounds sensible, but the bit of detail around what sort of things you sweat, what sort of and level of service, where do we see, you know, can't all sit with staff, we need to see some of the detail, I think, and have some decisions around the level of service might.
Yeah, for sure. So you know how on the activity plans you started having conversations around levels of service. Now is where we start to give shape to some of that direction. So through our next session around the infrastructure strategy and all the ones to follow, that's where you can start to say, actually, this level of service around safe roads is of relatively more importance to us than, say, our footpaths.
Yeah.
And we can go away and we can build that in to how we plan for our
might be helpful if there are some questions, like the activity plans are just sort of this A4 with a whole lot of stuff. To make them really useful, it might pay to have some questions around level of service, if that's what we're wanting to know, so that we give you some planning or direction.
The other thing that we've just started pulling together in advance of that session on the 30th is actually under these scenarios, how do your levels of service shift? So if we applied this, you would see an increase in this level of service, or this is what you would need to invest to maintain.
This would be the cost trade-off, because, you know, it might not be worth losing the level of service on something, but something else we might see a massive.
And like Kelly said, this is just part of the whole, right? So if you're making a decision that this level of service is really important to us, we would reflect that in our renewal program, but it would also be reflected in your improvement program as well, because those things together ultimately what
just got to sit with the cost, because you can't understand whether you want to make the trade-off unless you understand the scale. Yeah, the scale, you know. And we haven't seen numbers so far. This is the OPEX numbers don't exist for us, other than in big chunks. We can't make the calls.
I think it would also be worth, you know, if we're looking at whether it's building types or pros or street furniture, just some thoughts from staff on just think, I wouldn't worry too much about this, but you really don't want to move away from that, because at the end of the day, that's the advice, isn't it? That otherwise we'll just sort of have a guess around the table, maybe, which is probably not the most objective. But having some sort of, where are the nuggets? Where's what's going to shift the dial? What are the things that, what might be the difficult decisions that aren't cold dry?
Yeah, we don't review the rubbish funds this year. What do we say?
Yeah, that's your weekly versus 2 weekly on your red bins.
I suppose one thing that you might want to contemplate as governors is how you get really clear around your risk appetite, what you want your levels of service to look like, so that the team can then go away and say, well, here's how we would recommend working across your asset classes. So you're not in a position of having to choose between bins and footpaths. That makes sense.
And what I would say is that particularly with having NZTA in the picture, they very clearly make us have these conversations when we put in the NLTP submission. So a lot of the programs are already tensioned by, what level you want to invest in, partly by what the levels that they say they want to invest in. But it does influence how we put forward a renewals program to you guys. And I just thought this, when we were talking about the activity plans last time, there was a question, I don't think it might have come up around how does our level of investment compare across the country? And so that's what this is. And the reason I'm showing you is I've got 2 graphs here, one which is the investment in our resale program. And you'll see here, it probably doesn't matter who they are, but you'll see the orange line, which is us. And then you'll see some really big peaks. And interestingly enough, so the dotted line is the average level of investment. And this is sort of normalized by a per kilometre level of investment. So if you've got more in your network, it sort of reflects that. But a lot of those big peaks are those big urban authorities, so they're high cost. And then we're kind of sitting on that line with a lot of those provincial centres, which is, makes a lot of sense. And you can see that we're just slightly above average. We did historically, we were an outlier where we had a really high level of investment with in our roading network, or particularly in our resales, and we've worked really hard. We used to be considered a bit of a gold plating network in terms of how much renewals that we did. And we've worked really hard over the last probably 10 years to really change the story and to show that we do put some tension into our programs and come up with a really realistic program. And we've been really fortunate that has meant now that when we ask NZTA for money, they tend to give us what we ask for, because they know that we're going to invest it sensibly. If we just pop to the next slide, this one's an example of a lower risk level of investment. And so this one is in what they call traffic services. That covers things like lines and signs and street lights. And I just put the 2 there just to show the difference of the fact that, I think we've got a really robust level of investment in that road resurfacing. But actually, when you look at that, we're nowhere near the average. Some of this does, and I do want to qualify this, it does partly to do with your asset density. If you've got really dense assets, you've probably got a lot more signs, so you end up paying a little bit more. But the approach that we do take with signage is that it's a lower, we can take more risk. Therefore, we operate more on a reactive approach. And actually that brings to call, I think, Nikki, you talked about the operational costs. There is a direct relation between your renewals and your OPEX. So if you have a lower level of investment in your renewals, you're going to spend more reactively reacting on your network to things like complaints and potholes and things like that. It's just a well-known relationship between those 2 levels. And so that we probably see that in things like the signage, that we are reacting, therefore we're paying more at that operational, not that CapEx level. These graphs are actually, I think most of these might be available. There's a website called Transport Insights, which is a website that pulls together all the information from, it's sort of done by a collaboration called the Road Efficiency Group, and it brings together data from all across New Zealand. And so there's some really useful insights that you can get around comparing how we, looking at how we compare to the rest of New Zealand. And there's a load of crash statistics and things there that you can look at. If anyone's interested, I could send through the link afterwards.
Question: do you really think that we are doing well in terms of the amount of our spend, both on traffic services and on resurfacing? Because when I look at this, yes, correct, all of those large bars belong to cities, but some of those cities are smaller than we are, and it's based on permanent population and not our bulge population, which is double that size. So per kilometer travel, we might be really under.
Yeah, and that's a really good, it's a really good question. And when we look at these comparative graphs, these all feed into our activity management plan, which we then build up the case for why we would invest in each of the different types of renewals, whether it's bridges or roads or traffic services. So that's definitely something that we do look into. There is an argument that we should, things like waymarking, visitor drivers, should we be making sure that those signs, I think on the whole, we don't get too many complaints about our signage, for example. What I would say in this particular category, which includes street lighting, is I do think street lighting is an area where we may see that, we're definitely going to see that request for funding increase in this next LGP, and that will where you'll see the comparative costs go up.
Is that a case you can make it NZTA for co-pays?
Yeah, absolutely. Through both the long-term plan and through to NZTA, we'll be putting in, we have tended to be quite reactive on our street lighting renewals, and that is a bit of a step change that we want to do going forward, is actually be a bit more proactive as we become more urban and there's more risk around that. I think it's probably a little bit of a change that we would see. Yeah. So
benefits from some government funding, didn't we, for going to LEDs and things on, like we did a big program on transferring to LEDs.
Yeah. 2018, we don't know what the percentage of the network, but yeah, we tried to convert as many of our standard luminaires to from high pressure sodium to LEDs, which unfortunately it didn't have as much of an effect because our electricity prices went up. But that's a really good example of, we were able to maximise and renew. Unfortunately, some of the luminaires are probably coming to end of life, so we're going to face a big renewals for all those LEDs that we did in a few years' time. So, the disadvantage of doing a big batch renewal like that is we're going to end up with a big bow wave of that. So we just wanted to talk through a little bit around how we actually, how do we put our approach into practice? And there's a lot of work that happens in the background around understanding the need for our renewals and how do we tension the renewals dollars that we're asking for. And it starts off with really good data. Actually, how many assets do we have? What type are they? How old are they? How long does each of the different assets last? And we, in some areas, particularly roading, for example, we do a lot of deterioration modelling. So there's fancy software that you put all the data into a big black box, and it will sort of understand how long that asset is expected to last and come up with, figures around that. But we also do a lot of condition assessment. So property, we have building inspectors that go around and actually look at all of the different elements of a building, things like HVAC systems, electrical systems. We have trucks that drive over our road, looking big machines that have lasers and look at how the network's performing. So there's a lot of data analysis that happens. And we also look at the criticality. We talked about wanting to protect our critical assets. Well, how do we know they're critical? We look at what that asset is, what role is that asset performing. So things like bridges, we know they're really, common sense, they're really critical. They're a pinch point in our network. We know we need to invest in those. Things like roads, to ensure and to prioritise the roads and what is the risk that road carries. We look at how does it connect to lifelines? Does it have important water assets in it? Does it have power assets? Where does it service? Is it an emergency route for the state highways, for example? And if it fails, what is the consequence of that failure? So we look at all that information, we do some analysis and come up with a program. And that program is even within itself looks at the level of service. And so when we look at the level of service that we talked about, how bumpy is the road, we can actually model whether we're happy to accept the road to be bumpier or less bumpier. And that can put different triggers in the system, and we can actually tweak our investment by looking at that. As we work through, we try to look at scheduling efficiency. So as Jessie mentioned, getting some investment around alignment with our improvement program. If we've got a road or a bridge, when we renew that, should we look at making it 2 lanes instead of 1? Should we make sure that there are pipes that can go in? Can we make the road bigger? Can we make the bridge stronger? There's a lot of work that happens in there and some real opportunities. And that's something where we're trying to get a lot smarter at doing. And then as we move into delivery, the contractor does the work, we renew it, and we capture all the data saying that this road has been built and we're now expecting it to last, you know, and it just goes into an endless cycle of, you know, build, maintain, operate, renew. I don't know how much detail you guys are interested in, you know, understanding about those actual renewal processes. I guess it's really, are there any points in the process that you want to get a bit more certainty?
How do you work out when you're giving information to the finance team about what the cost of depreciation is?
Yeah.
Are you considering, sorry if you've already mentioned this, are you considering all the different components of an SS system? You know, because obviously you'll put in the thing and it costs this much, but some of the components need renewing at different times and multiple times through the life of other parts of the asset. How do you send that information? How do you quantify that and then send that through the finance team?
Yeah, so we have our asset management systems and we hold all the assets. So you can see them on a map, all of our streetlights, everything. Those are all held at a real component level. And the componentization that you have depends on how you expect that asset to perform. So sometimes you just have a straight line deterioration. You know that this road, this light is going to give you 10 years life.
Yeah.
When we do, each year we do evaluation where we do a stock take. So we look at all the assets that we have. We feed in, sometimes we feed in the condition. So how much is that asset deteriorated, either by age or by condition. And then we can actually work out, because we knew what the baseline of cost of that asset was, we're able to calculate, you know, how much that asset's depreciated and how much we would need to spend to maintain it to whatever level of service we decided to. So let's just say the current state. And so that all goes into the asset system. And so they finance, we basically give them a dump each year of what the projected depreciation would be for each of those assets.
And do you think, this might be off topic, but you know, this morning they said, you know, there's a slug of stuff coming through 23rd to 37 or something, I think Mark said, where, you know, we're going to have a lot of renewals come on board, chunky ones maybe, all at once. How does the system of funding depreciation make sure that we have enough ability, you know, to pay down enough of the debt so that when comes time to renew those assets, there's sufficient debt available?
Yeah, so a lot of that will come down to the choice. So, you know, finance, I guess, when they're looking at the different mechanisms that they have to fund it, funding depreciation is basically creating a savings account for you to put that in. And so that's probably a policy decision that needs to be made. I guess I see our job as saying what is the current state of the assets and how much you need to maintain it. And that's probably really that finance decision to say, how do we use the different tools we have to finance?
It feels like we're putting aside enough to do the renewals that we need to do to keep going. I'm just wondering when the bigger renewals hit us, potentially.
So we usually model over a 20 to 30 year period. So, you know, we're constantly, and we run those models every 3 years. So we are constantly looking forward and, you know, we'll see the profile of that you know, the bow wave or whatever you want to call it, what's stuff coming.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like,
yeah, that's definitely a bow wave.
I was thinking of material of the river.
But I think Three Waters is a good example where we've seen that, you know, sustained lack of investment. And so we will have, and look, we're a relatively young network. So,
that's
you know,
the problem, right? In some ways, because
and a lot of these assets have all been built at the same time. And that's what that future problem is. Those bow wave will hit us in the big blocks that we've received for the assets. So we talked about the LED renewal. You know, historically, all of our LEDs, all of our luminaires would have been kind of a little bit piecemeal, but now it's going to hit us in one big block. So we need to make sure in that big block we've got the money sitting there to do it. Sorry.
That's right. That relates to that kind of. Does that mean, so when you have a big chunk of budget that's going to go towards renewals or, you know, the road needs work, does that affect new assets or?
So it doesn't affect new assets, but what it does is affects your ability to fund, you know, new assets. So you do have to sometimes make that choice. Do we want to renew those assets now, or do we want to defer that investments because we want to build some new stuff? And that's why they talk about renewals, and depreciation enables it to have that intergenerational equality, because you're spreading the cost of that renewal over time.
And then similar question, like with the roundabout happening, I know they probably bring in a whole lot of contractors, but does that also affect the type of how much renewals we can do because they're using up a lot of contractors?
It can do, yeah, and that's certainly something. I mean, we have most of our renewals are delivered through our maintenance contracts or through term contracts. So we have an ability to signal that we have this amount of renewals for our pipe network and we have this amount for our roading network. So we do engage with the contracting community to make sure that we have capacity. A lot of the time, actually, the risk is around, regionally, there are only limited contractors. So by signalling to the industry what's happening, then it does tend to give us that stability. We haven't come across that issue yet for renewal.
So what's the process for working out what's a critical asset and what's a sweet asset or a low risk asset? Is there national guidelines? Is there something that there's a framework that you work within?
Yeah, so
how do you work that
out? There's a number of answers to that, and I guess with the transport, within the transport, we've got a lot of guidance that comes from NZTA. The key thing that we want to do with our renewals is protect the assets we have. So for us, we know we need to keep the roads waterproof. That really drives it. That's our highest cost, and we know that we've got bridges that we need to keep component renewing. So they are the high cost, high value asset. If we don't look after them, we know it's going to have, it's going to be really expensive for us to maintain. The assets that we probably don't put as much time and energy into, are the ones, the low cost ones that actually, if a sign is faded, and yes, there are potential impacts on not having the right sign, people might get lost, people might not drive safely, and those are certainly really important. And for those ones, we would look at the important corridors on our network and we would focus the investment on those. But actually, some of them on lower volume roads that don't get much, we probably just
we don't treat footpaths and active travel paths the same way that we do roads in terms of renewals, do we?
No, and a lot of that comes to they deteriorate really slowly, so there's less of an issue around that. The key issue that we have on our network that influences renewals is having big heavy trucks on our network. And we're really vulnerable for that, right? Because there's so much construction happening on our network. Footpaths, they deteriorate slower, so we've got the ability to watch them and take a bit of a back seat on those. Now with growing active travel, though, I think that might.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we need to be smarter about that because I don't think we do renew our, and we don't even invest. Look at our footpaths for root upheaval and damage and stuff like that. And we don't paint our cyclists line and our active travel routes in the same way we renew our.
We do
line markings and stuff. We simply don't. I mean, it's self-evident.
Yeah, and we do. I mean, we do regular surveys, but on the high volume roads, we inspect monthly. But for an active travel network, we're probably only doing proactive condition surveys once every 3 years. So yeah, and that's part of that critical process, right? The more important that something is, we look at it more often, and then it ends up getting that investment. But that's a level of service that you.
I don't think we should be seeing them as less important. I think we should be viewing them, and doing a program that makes sense for the nature of the network. But I mean, we're just not looking at them closely.
No, and that's a choice that when we talked about investment strategies, that's a choice that you as governors can actually choose. If you want to have a high level of service on your footpath, you could choose that over a road. You could choose that.
We need advice for you to tell us what's the appropriate level of renewal or whatever on those, because there's. I mean, I can think of a number of places where there's lumps in them. That I can think of places that aren't more than a couple of years old that have chip seal that's corrugated effectively because it's the chips have piled up, and we're just not repainting the signs and stuff and on the ground and the.
What's the risk we're considering? Is it do we have the risk set at risk of serious injury and stuff, and therefore is that likely to cause a serious injury? And that's not why we're not renewing? Is that?
Yeah, and that's part of the conversation. And I think as we have these more and more of these active travel networks, we will be starting to collect the data on the amount of accidents. We're starting to collect, issues from boardworks programs. But I mean, footpaths, pathways and cycleways only started to be subsidisable by NZTA in 2018. So, you know, that's probably one area where it has never been proactively funded, and that would have to be, even now, the current government and the government policy statement reduced the amount of funding available for footpaths. So that's something that, you know, that the council would want to invest in. You know, that's the type of thing we may have to choose to do it unsubsidised because it's important enough.
Well, we at least need to know. We need to know what the risk is. We need the size of the network, and I mean that my point is I just don't think that very well, because I think we're seeing deterioration in parts of the network that haven't been considered.
And is the risk acceptable as against the risk of people leaving the district because it's unaffordable to fund the rates, to fund the those are the real risks that we have to control.
You know, the thing that we're trying to do is by doing enough renewals, we save money. Right, it's not being efficient. I'm trying to find the balance between what's the efficient renewal program for our cycle trails and footpaths, because leaving them to fall away to nothing isn't the answer.
No.
And so
on a similar lines though, I'm just wondering with active travel networks and those sorts of things, is it actually from a renewals cost perspective better for us to hard seal some trails than actually to gravel?
So really good question, and it probably depends on how much usage they're getting.
Frankton Road, Frankton Track, for example. Which, you know, do you want me to go there or somewhere else? You choose whichever one you like.
It's the level of service tension too, right? You know, we heard loud and clear from the community. They did not want that track sealed.
But from purely from a cost perspective, would it make more sense to seal it?
So I guess it tends to be quite situational, something like active travel. So it's really an unsealed trail, for example, is really vulnerable to weather events. And if you'd probably want to make sure that you've got to put it sealed, you've got good drainage, and that it's going to be protected. I think where we see, again, going back to use of the road network, having a seal where you've got a lot of usage is fundamentally, it needs to be sealed to reduce the operational cost. I think it's probably less significant in the footpaths, unless there are other kind of climatic.
But with Frankton Road, for example, Frankton Track, sorry, you pretty much did everything to set that piece up, and the only thing you haven't done is seal it. Is that pretty much it?
Yeah. And look, probably an example like that is more about what's an acceptable level of service. You know, does having a sealed track, would that have, got more people using it rather than an economic cost? Because in many ways for active travel routes, having a trail is a lot easier to reinstate and do than it would be to seal it. Because it's less than money.
At what point do we get to make a decision around maybe moving the active travel cycle trails from low risk assets to critical assets? So is there an opportunity for us to have that conversation?
Yeah, is that a conversation that you want to have? I guess that's, it's hard. You guys have a lot of decisions to make, and I would hope perhaps that you would give us a direction to say that's something that is important, but you don't want to get into the granular detail of how do we balance the program.
The point is I want the confidence there's a program that's renewing them.
Yeah.
And looking at them, because investigating them.
Yeah, and that's where our asset management plans are really designed for, is to give you that confidence, to give you the how our network is performing.
I certainly don't want to tell you how many times you want to sweep them and reseal it. But I want someone to look at them.
Yeah.
Is thinking of it from a risk perspective and our risk policy and our risk frameworks and stuff, we should at a governance level probably be able to set our risk appetite in useful categories and not have to go into any of the granular detail. It should be adequate for you to make the decisions that you need to make, but I don't think it is. And we've got so many sitting outside of risk appetite anyway. And I'm looking through the strategic risk going, how do any of these give you any guidance at all? So I'm just wondering, I'm just interested in your perspective on that. Like, so we should be setting a risk appetite that's meaningful, and it should be a closed loop so that you're managing risk within appetite. And if we want to change that, we change it.
Yeah, and that's actually something that I've started to, I have started to engage with Gareth around that risk framework. And I think probably the only example where we've got one that we can really have that risk appetite is around, health and safety. The risk, there's a tier 1 risk about keeping people healthy and safe. And then we've now created a tier 2 risk around deaths or serious injuries on our network. So we're trying to That's been really useful, I think, even when we bring papers to council around decisions, is actually we can really directly link now a level of service around safety to our risk register and to what that level of investment might be looking at in a council.
And if we had
you can
for
do
our
that
tier one risks a bit more nuance around where we're prepared to make trade-offs, if we have that, do that piece of work where we go, health and safety, we're prepared to trade off here and here, but not here. And then you could take that away and you'd have some more guidance and be more certain perhaps around where.
Yeah, I think we have to have a think about how that would work, but I think.
So that we're not always having to go signs or not signs or this.
Yeah,
this,
you
or
definitely don't want to be
think,
doing
because, when I mentioned that before, it's like you are going into the detail, Nikki, but we've got no assurance that we've given you what we need for you to make the decisions that align with where we're at. I don't know, I'm just wondering
how we have to go away and mull on that a little bit about how that would work in practice.
The system work better.
Yeah.
What we have started to do in building up our capital inputs to the next LTP is to be quite deliberate about attaching that spend to a level of service and the relationship of that spend to the level of service. So actually, is it an improvement? Is it maintaining it? Is it correcting for an existing deficit? So you can actually start to see what does it cost you as an organisation to maintain this level of service. And we're also doing the same with risk. So actually, if this investment is responding to a risk category, what is it? So we can start to quantify that investment.
First, to be clear on what the level of service is, because we're not. I mean, you look at what we did up at Isle Street, and it is a level of service we haven't, in terms of footpaths and rain gardens and stuff, we haven't applied anywhere else in the district. So
So that would be an example where we would say this expenditure is lifting a level of service.
Yeah, that's right. But it has to be reflected, it has to, anyway.
But it's something we haven't done.
In terms of our depreciation schedule, and our scheduled renewals and our scheduled, if you want, resurfacing. Like you said, our infrastructure is fairly young. I think in the Crown Range Road is barely 25 years old. Is there sort of a financial pig through the snake that's coming up where we're suddenly going to get hit with a big bill in 10 or 15 years for renewals?
Yeah. So that's that bellway that we talked about. So an example could be the fact that we did all of our LED luminaires at one time, and we know that they're probably all going to fail around the same time. In transport, like our road network, we've got a reasonable amount of asphalt on the network. So, think about, we're actually dealing with a bit of a bow wave at the moment. You would have seen on Cadrona Valley Road, we've been kind of incrementally doing rehabs along that road. And so that's, I guess, trying to mitigate a bow wave coming. But there are
what the big bill is per year. It's going to suddenly do this.
Oh, well, we try to spread, when we do our renewals planning, we model for 20 or 30 years, and then we try and spread it over a 10-year period. So we're constantly, like every 3 years, we're re-spreading it over 10 years with an eye to the future. So we work really hard not to have a bow wave, I guess is my answer. And if we weren't doing our job properly, that would be a bow wave that we would see sitting out in, year 15, 20, that but we can't let that happen. So we're trying to spread the cost and have some consistent investment.
And you ensure you don't get critical deterioration if you're sort of trying to spread out as wide as you possibly can. So you don't have that bow wave. How do you ensure that you don't have like a critical renewal on a road, for example?
Yeah, so we consistently monitor the condition of the network. We consistently run models to check that anything that's coming up to end of life, that we're actually getting to it before it fails. So we spend a lot of energy. You might have seen the big yellow truck that drives around our network with, it videos all of the surface and pavement. It has lasers that picks up, curvature, texture, roughness, and how bumpy is the road. And so all of that information just gets fed into these models. And so we can really, have quite a high confidence in, things like our road network. Probably where I think we've got a lower level of maturity around our renewals is things like, property. We're still trying to get our head around, it's slightly harder to monitor. It's a little bit more subjective around how we look at a portfolio like that, because a lot of that is about the user experience when someone goes into a building, that type of thing. So we're trying to apply some more structured mechanisms around our other portfolios that we perhaps have in the roading portfolio.
Do you have many assets that fall off the register?
Fall off, you mean we just don't know we have?
No, Maybe that's gone.
I mean, we don't have a lot of assets. I guess with a young portfolio, we haven't had to make a lot of effort in looking at disinvestment, but there are examples where we may not want to keep maintaining, roads. Killop Road's a good example. We have to look at how a road is being used or how an asset's being used, and can we financially sustain skippers? Like there's a big piece of work that needs to be done on skippers. High level of investment, is that worth us putting money in renewing the bridge and the road, or is that where we're prepared to lower our level of, just walk away from some of these assets?
I suppose another example would be you choose to invest in a new transfer station for Wanaka. We decommission the other one and it falls away, right? So sometimes when we're not doing a like replacement existing, we would fall away.
Yeah.
Very good. So we'll get the activity plans, and we'll get some levels of service. We'll have some costs.
Won't have costs for the 30th, but we'll at least start to show you how we're syncing those things up. Yeah.
Can we see budgets from years before? So there aren't costs for the LTP, this LTP, but there must have been costs for the last LTP. And there must have been costs from the annual plan.
Just to help us understand quantum, ballpark, because I wouldn't know how much you spent on something.
What we could do is give you an indication of scale, but in terms of line by line, we'll not be a year into work with that on to review unit rates. But we can definitely do some kind of, we can pull together what was spent on our renewals historically.
I'm interested in knowing what we did for the last LTP. So at some point the line by line was done, or whatever was done was done. I don't know, whatever was done is fine. But I'd just like to see what was done last LTP in terms of what was put to the managers in order to have those budgets put into the LTP. I'm assuming actually tier 3 manager probably had their budget and they submitted it. I'm hoping someone submitted budgets and somewhere they were approved, and that's how the numbers were.
I don't think we're talking about renewals.
No.
So that's probably.
Well, some of it will be renewals.
Yeah.
It will be. Well, obviously we have CapEx costs around place, but we don't have OpEx, and renewals is part of it. And I don't know what level of detail, but whatever level of detail we can, I'd love to see. It just helps provide.
Sorry, Jessie, can you clarify? Renewals is CapEx.
Renewals is CapEx.
It's not OpEx, it's CapEx. So in the last LTP, you approved it on a line by line basis in the capital program. So what we're doing here is explaining how they determine the renewals, and then they're going to show it to you separate, so that when we do our line by line, you're really focused on big projects and not. We're going to look at the renewals together.
So our maintenance and operations is OpEx,
right. Yeah,
and
you're
the
right.
renewals
Yeah.
is CapEx.
Sorry. Okay. That's so
You didn't see it with the methodology last
No.
time, and then saying when you apply this methodology for transport,
Yeah,
here are all the renewals.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was buried in the CapEx list.
And the Chief Financial Officer just confirmed that. So I think.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Well, thank you.
Is that helpful?
Yes.
Yeah, really good.
Yeah. And thanks for being with us during the day. Councillors.
Thanks for talking about this.
Thanks for being so.
Okay. Right.
See you guys tomorrow. See you tomorrow.